IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Happy Thursday. We are one day closer to Friday, which means we're another day closer to when Notre Dame kicks off to Miami down in Miami on August 31st. It's still a ways away, but one day closer is one day closer, man. But right now, Notre Dame is still currently going through spring practices. Yesterday, they finished their fourth edition of spring practice, which means right now they're about a third of the way through. So today, what we're going to talk about is Brian and I are going to talk about kind of state of the union offensive line room. They are now, like I said, a third of the way through spring practices. We're going to kind of talk about what we know, what we've seen. Joe Rudolph spoke with the media yesterday, covered a bunch of different topics. We're going to talk through some of the quotes that he had yesterday, and then a little bit of projecting of what we see through the lineman room, the offensive line, and what that could mean for them throughout the 2025 season. And then after that today, folks, we are going to have a mailbag. We're going to go for about an hour or until we run out of questions. The best way to get your submission in, you can put them in throughout the show. If a topic comes up that you guys have a question or a comment on, go ahead and put an MB for mailbag or a mailbox emoji in there. Lets Brian and I know to set that comment off to the side, and we can go ahead and add to it later. And as always, if you want your question bumped up to the top of that list, we always appreciate a super chat thrown in there. But Brian, today we will be talking about the offensive line.
Yeah, Trev, we were sitting there kind of discussing like the different things we wanted to talk about today, and first of all, we kind of covered a lot before, so it's like some of the topics we maybe did a little too much before spring when you consider how little access we actually have to the team. And so we were talking about the offensive line because obviously Joe Rudolph was talking to the media, and there was a lot of very interesting comments in there. Some that we looked at and were like, oh, Lord, just kind of make you roll your eyes and shake your head a little bit. Some of them were like, well, that's really good stuff right there. And so we wanted to kind of go through that. And then some of it's like, well, what does this really mean for Notre Dame? Because some of the stuff that we're seeing this spring, it's like, I don't really know what to make of all this. I don't really know what to make of, this current offensive line situation, because it is such a unique spring. It's such a, you look at it and you're like, you want to have a competition on the offensive line, but is it really possible to have a competition on the offensive line when you consider, guys aren't healthy and just all these different things, and certain guys aren't there that, maybe a guy like a Will Black would be competing for a starting job, if not for some injury situations. Anthony Knapp's out. So it's really look at it and say, man, the offensive line right now is a major question mark. And I don't know that there's anything that's going to be able to happen during the spring that's going to make it not a question mark. But some of the things we were hoping to see that might make us feel a little bit better about it, I don't know that we're going to see. And when I say that we're not going to see, it's just like they're not going to let us see it because the limited availability. I'm hoping that next Saturday we'll have a much better idea of kind of where things are, whether they're just going to have a practice or whether they're going to have a jersey scrimmage. I'm still uncertain of what exactly that's going to look like, but I'm hoping that we'll get to see some of the things that they tell us that they're doing that we haven't actually seen with our own eyes. We'll get a chance to see that, because the reality, Trev, is this is a huge, huge situation for Notre Dame, because getting the O-line right in 2025 is even more important than it was in 2023 or 2024. And the reason I say that is because, well, maybe not 2023, but 2024. And the reason I say that is because you're going to have a very different dynamic at quarterback. And we said, we said this when we were looking at sort of just breaking down the team and looking at 2025. But more so, we said it all year during the 2024 season. Riley Leonard made this offensive line look a lot better than it was at times in pass pro. Same thing with the running backs in the run game. Sometimes they turned average blocks into 60-yard touchdowns. I mean, that's how good the skilled talent was for Notre Dame this year. And there was other times when the offensive line looked pretty good, but it just was a very inconsistent group all season. And it was a little bit of a frustrating group at times all season for understandable reasons in some regards. I mean, your most talented guy got hurt first week of fall camp. You're a center that we were expecting big things from gets hurt in the third game of the year. Your talented guard that we talked about how when those two kids were putting the starting lineup the year before, you averaged over 250 yards a game rushing. They got hurt, and they both got hurt in the third game of the year. So you spent, you didn't have a single game this past season where you had what we went into fall camp thinking was you're going to be your projected offensive line. And so so when I look at this offensive line, Trevor, you come into the 25 season and you're saying, okay, there's been some really good things we've seen from the Joe Rudolph era. There's been some head scratching things from the Joe Rudolph era. What is year 3 going to look like? And we sit here today on March 23rd, and it's like there's a ton of question marks. And it's like, and you see it in the fan base, and that's really why we're talking about it today, because I put in a breakdown of the entire practice yesterday of what I saw from the offense, and I thought there's a lot of good stuff. There's stuff about CJ Carr, there's stuff about Cam Williams, and like the first 3-4 responses are just complaints about the offensive line, about a dude that wasn't even practicing. And so while frustrating at the time, you realize like this is a topic that the fan base is interested in. And so we're like, hey, let's dive into it today. And so we're gonna discuss it. We're gonna talk about several different things and just really get into it, because I do think this offensive line has to play at a high level, because you are going to have a different looking team. You're going to be a much more balanced offense, or you need to be a much more balanced offense if you want to make the run that you need to make, because you don't have Riley Leonard's running ability to kind of complement Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. You're going to need a thrower, whether that's Steve Angeli, CJ Carr, Kenny Minchie. It really doesn't matter, and you can put those 3 guys in any order you want to. Whoever's the starter is going to need an offensive line that makes a big jump in pass pro. And really, pass pro for me has been an issue the last 2 years. You had Joe Walt that was great at it 2 years ago, but everybody else was wildly inconsistent. Last year, your entire line was wildly inconsistent in pass pro. That can't happen again in year 3. And so we're just going to talk about all those things and really dive into all those different aspects about the offensive line and some things we like, some things we don't like. Because if this team is going to get where it needs to get to, Joe Rudolph is going to have to do a knockout job with this group. Not just teaching, which is something I think he was really good at. And I thought the way he improved the run game blocking last year was outstanding. And that was a big jump in improvement and how they blocked. The blocking at times wasn't elite because of the makeup of the line, but the technique and the toughness and the physicality they played with was significantly better than it was the year before when you had a first and a second round draft pick on it. I think a lot of that is about coaching and instilling that mentality, and you got to give them a lot of credit for that. Pass blocking, I didn't see a whole lot of improvement, and in some ways we saw regression. So there's just a lot of different things that you look at and say, man, there's some really good things. There's some really good things that they're doing right now. And there's some other things you look at and say, this is a concern for me. And that's what makes evaluating the offensive line a challenge right now. And that's really why we wanted to address this topic, Trev, because it getting answered right is going to have such an impact on this 2024 team.
A lot of the conversations that I have and a lot of the thoughts that I have surrounding this team isn't about what kind of success that they're going to have in the regular season, which in a certain light is a good spot to be in when we're talking about Notre Dame. A lot of this is about what happens postseason and beyond. And you can go and you can look at some of the numbers and what that means for Notre Dame. As the postseason went on, pass blocking specifically digressed from where it was at in the regular season. I mean, just between the Penn State game and the Ohio State game alone, they allowed 24 total pressures in their final 2 games. When we're talking about Notre Dame, it's similar to the quarterback battle. Whether depending on what camp you're in, whether you're, Team CJ, Team Steve, Team Kenny, it's all about how far you can get Notre Dame to their ceiling, which ideally is playing for and winning a national championship. And I have similar thoughts around the offensive line. When we talk about the makeup of this O-line, they could try it out, honestly, any combination of 5 that they want to out there to get them through an 11-1 regular season. Let's just call a spade here, because the talent that they have in that room is very, very loaded. But then you go through and you look at what happened in the postseason. They gave up 14 pressures against Penn State, 3 sacks, 2 hits on the quarterback, 9 hurries. You go and look at what they did against Ohio State, 10 total pressures, 2 sacks, 3 hits on the quarterback, 5 hurries. And that is kind of what not helped, but that's kind of what inhibited the offense from really taking off and being consistently a championship caliber offense. Now, they had enough skill at the end of the game against Penn State to overcome that, and they won by a last-second field goal. They had a lot of the similar issues against Ohio State, and you know what the result of that game was. And so that's why this conversation is so important surrounding what the offensive line makeup is going to be, not for when they play USC in the middle of October, not for when they host Boise State for the first time in program history, but for what happens when you make it back to one of those major bowls. What happens when you get to the national championship? That's why all those things and all those conversations are so important, Brian.
Yeah, and look, I do believe that competition in the spring is important. I do believe that working on your depth chart is more important on the offensive line than it is than it may be at other positions, because and the offensive line, you don't see a lot of different guys play. At receiver, I don't care who's first team, second team, third team, whatever during the season. What I care about is more so, hey, getting them all getting them all on the same page with the quarterback, because you're going to play 5-6 guys when you get to the season. I don't care about necessarily right now who the number 3 running back is, or who's going to be your third down back, or who's going to be the number 2 or anything like that, because they're all going to play, and that stuff can get worked out in the fall. The offensive line is unique because that's the position where cohesion is so much more important. And it can really only be gained in practice, really. It's harder to gain that cohesion during the summer when working together than it is, like, say, a 7-on-7 tournament or a 7-on-7 competition or 1-on-1s that can be for skill positions, because that group tends to take a lot longer to gel. And so, it's really gonna be interesting, Trevor, to kind of see how this all shakes out, because I'll say again, I look at this football team and I say there's so many areas, Trevor, where this team, I think, has a chance to really, really be a special team. But my concern is avoiding the areas where you could, I think the right way to say this, there's about 3 or 4 positions that could be, but you ruined it all. This position kind of ruined it all. We've seen this in the past. We've seen this with quarterback at times. We've seen this with the offensive line in the past under different coaches, not Joe Rudolph. We've seen this, I still think of the 2021 team and just how bad that offensive line was and how problematic it was. And, I look back in years where it was the defense or the defensive line or the secondary was a problem. And there's always been these areas where it's like, okay, you were good here, and here, but it's this and this that kind of kept you from getting where you need to. And when I look at this Notre Dame offensive line, Trev, like, this group has a chance to be a driver of big-time success for this football team, or it could be something that becomes sort of impediment to this team reaching their full potential. And that's why this is so important. That's why we're putting so much stock into the decisions that are made and the battles that happen and things along those lines. And the other part of it too is if people are being honest with themselves, the reality is in each of the last 2 years, a strong case could be made that Joe Rudolph made bad decisions on who to start. And we can say that not just by our own opinions, but by what the line looked like when injuries forced him to start who he probably should have started to begin with. And we saw that in 2023 when Billy Schrouth and Ashton Craig were inserted into the lineup because of injuries. All of a sudden, the offensive line looked great the final 3 games of the year. And then you look at last year. I broke down a couple weeks ago the numbers of what the numbers look like when Billy Schrouth was in the lineup compared to when he wasn't. But even more so, looking at what the numbers were when Billy Schrouth and Rocco Spindler were in the line together, and making the case of that's what it should have been day one. And you saw in the playoff where the offensive line's getting their butts whooped in the first half by Penn State. You get 2 guys get injured on one series. And then the second half, you put in Tosh Baker, who we keep being told, can't play offensive line for Notre Dame, and he stinks, and he can't do this, and he can't do that. And then he goes into the Penn State game, and all of a sudden the offensive line looks like it can handle that with him and Jagasaw in the game. And then we see Charles Jagasaw playing left tackle in Ohio State, and he's probably their best offensive lineman in that game. And it's just like the reality is, had injuries not happened, we never would have seen Charles Jagasaw in the postseason if it wasn't for injuries. So those things all kind of get you to kind of scratch your head and say, boy, Joe Rudolph's doing a lot of good things at Notre Dame, but there's 2 areas that are major question marks right now: pass pro in decision making when it comes to who's going to play where and who's going to start in the starting lineup. And that is kind of where some of this stuff can be frustrating. But you'll look at it and say, but we all make mistakes as coaches. I made mistakes. I mean, I look back and say, boy, I should have probably played that guy a little bit more. I maybe shouldn't have been as put up with as much from this guy. I probably should have made a change a little bit sooner. Sometimes you kind of get wrapped up in the upside of a guy. So, you maybe give him a longer, a little bit more rope and then it's like, boy, I probably made that decision about 2 games too late. And we all have make those mistakes as coaches. And so it's not so much saying like, this is who he is, it's always going to be a problem, but it's like, hey, this has been an issue this year. Hopefully he's going to find out. And I think what makes Joe Rudolph's job tougher this spring is the fact that he doesn't have his full line. Billy Schrouth is limited. Emil Wagner is limited. Anthony Knapp's out this spring. Ashton Craig's out this spring. Makes it a lot harder for him to do that, but it also presents a great opportunity because now you get more reps for Gerby Lambert. You can get more reps for Sullivan Absher. You can get more reps for Charles Jagasol guard. Christopher Tarek is also out. But then it says, okay, but now are you going to be able to kind of find your right lineup now that, certain guys are out? Will Black doesn't show up until the fall. And that's what we're going to get to, Trev, and why this is so important about the makeup of the line. And we'll kind of do that a little bit second. But I wanted to dive into first, Trev, before we kind of get too deep into this, where the press conference yesterday you were at. And I'll leave a lot of comments to myself. But there were some intriguing answers that Joe Rudolph gave yesterday. Some are very telling. Some are like, well, now I'm even more confused than I was going into it. But there were some very interesting things that we wanted to kind of get into and talk about with the offensive line. But where I wanted to start, and some of them are kind of not great. Some of them are actually very encouraging. But one of the big questions we had, and this is where I want to start, one of the big questions we had coming into the spring was who was going to be the leaders, especially on offense. And one of the questions that Joe Rudolph was asked about yesterday was about leadership. And he's talking about the offensive line leading the room. And he had some comments yesterday. So I'm going to just kind of read some of the quotes that he had, and then we can discuss them, Trev. And you were there, so I want to kind of get your reaction to some of these. So I'm going to start off with this one. And then when I'm done, I really want to get your thoughts on it. But here's a couple comments that he had. So he was talking about, they had leaders last year and led in different ways, and some are vocal, some are, not. But he said he said this. He goes, who would you like to line up next to? That's one of the questions I ask each offensive lineman, and every single guy says Billy Schrouth. He has a vibe because of his mentality, his toughness, the way he wants to attack things, and makes me feel confident with his energy and his approach. That's leadership. Same thing. Who do you trust most in your everyday? And so many guys mention Emil Wagner and talk about just having a vision and seeing bigger picture things and helping guys to progress and get through things. And then young guys come in and ask them, who do you look to? And so many guys have said, Ashton Craig helps me through this in all different ways. He says, you hear so many guys for different things for different guys being mentioned that you're like, okay, we got the right stuff here. But I would say as an impact last year, they were all in a heavy leadership approach to doing things. That was something that was the most encouraging thing for me is, look, there is leadership emerging in this offensive line, according to the offensive line coach. It's hard for us to see it because Billy Schrouth, we haven't seen him take any reps. We haven't seen Ashton Craig take any reps, and Emil Wagner wasn't in one of the practices. But to hear that, it does give you a sense of, okay, it sounds like some guys are stepping up and it's being noticed by their teammates, not so much from coach speak from the coach, but more so because of how the teammates are responding. And I think that's an important piece. Like that's a big takeaway from this summer as well.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway for me for those comments, I think there's a common theme when you talk about the offensive line. And when you start talking about playing as a cohesive unit, every other position group, it makes sense when you ask them, it's like, hey, who's the guys you look up to? Who's the person that you turn to? Historically in the past, in the secondary, it's like, oh, man, I would always go to Xavier Watts. Man, I would always sit down with Cam Hart or Ben Morrison. receiving room. It's like, hey, man, like I would sit down with Jaden Greathouse. I would sit down with a Bo Collins and, but I think there's a tendency, understandably so, to look at the offensive line as just one unit. You know what I mean? It's a lot of, well, I mean, they're just the O-line. They have to play together cohesively as a unit. But within that, you still need to have your leaders, the guys that kind of pull everybody together. Players in the past that have been that way, guys like Jarrett Patterson, one of the veterans on that offensive line. A lot of young guys would look to him. Back in 2017, a lot of people would turn and look at Mike McGlinchey or Quentin Nelson in terms of, man, we just got to get through this practice. Man, I need a little bit of guidance here. Who do I look to? And it
Alex
was extremely
was that way that year, and also in 2018 as well. Liam Eichenberg and Robert Hainsey were that way in 2020. Right. Every great offensive line in Notre Dame has had that kind of guy. Nick Martin in 2015 was that kind of guy. So, yeah, Zach Martin, Chris Watt, Mike Golick were those guys in 2012. So, yes, every great Notre Dame offensive line has had that where you could point to very easily and say, yeah, those were the leaders of that team.
And it answered some of the, I don't want to say concerns, but just some of the open questions that we had after guys like a Rocco and a Pat Coogan are no longer with the team, after guys like Joe Alt departed because he went to the NFL after the 23 season. We had some questions, and we thought, you know what, maybe guys like Emil step up. He was the only offensive lineman that played all 16 games. Maybe it's a guy like Billy Schrouth who's moving up into his role of being that veteran in the room. Same thing with Ashton Craig. And I think the one thing in common, all three of those guys were in the same class, weren't they? And so then they're at this point now where they have now –
Craig and Wagner?
Yes.
Yeah, they were all in the same class.
Okay. Okay. So now they're all in the point where they are now moving into that role. And you can still see that the thing that made Notre Dame's offensive line so special and all the years that we just mentioned, all the special players that have came through, it's still holding true. As in, yes, they have to play as a cohesive unit, but there's guys within that step up and take on the leadership role to pass on the knowledge that they learned, to leave a situation better than what they found it. Hearing Joe Rudolph comment about that yesterday in the press conference put my mind at ease in that aspect of the room. Of it's not just a bunch of talented guys and they're just trying to figure out who fits in where, and then they're going to let the offense take them where they need to go. It is people pointing out direction. It's passing on knowledge that they've learned. In guys like Ashton Craig's case, I think it is huge that young guys coming in are saying, hey, Ashton Craig's the guy that I turn to, and he's not taking any live reps right now. Hasn't since the third week of the season due to an unfortunate knee injury.
He has only 6 starts at this point in time because of the injuries, right?
And that to me speaks volumes, speaks absolute volumes. So in that regard, the state of the offensive line room is something that I couldn't be happier about, is that they do still have that core group of leaders, because that's what elevates teams forward. We've talked about it before on the show about how some of the best teams are player-led. Not like players are calling out the plays and they're deciding lineups, but it's players are taking charge in the direction that they want to go to. How do you do that? You need leaders everywhere throughout your team. And it almost makes sense that the oldest guys in that room are the guys that people are looking up to. That's a tradition that's been carried on now for the better half of a decade and some change, the 2 decades and some change, really. And it's good to see. It's really good to see.
Some other comments that he made is I think he talked about the challenge of finding his best 5 this spring, and I did think this was an interesting comment. He said, I think it's just getting better, like talking about the focus. He goes, I think it's just getting better right now. The nice thing about this is we have all summer long to keep working on all of fall camp. And boy, at the end of this week, we'll have guys that get back in the end of spring that can be out there together too. So it sounds like some guys maybe playing a little bit more in the spring. And then he says, they ask him about, is it may seem impossible. Somebody asked him about, seems impossible to know your best 5 at the end of spring. He goes, yeah, in some ways you have a lot of confidence in a lot of guys, and they got a lot of reps at certain positions, so you feel pretty good there. And then there's going to be some battles. There's going to be some guys that can compete with them to be able to raise the bar, or in some cases, maybe win the job, which is what you want to foster. I thought it was very interesting that he said it that way, because I look at it 2 ways. He goes, there's going to be some battles. And then he said, and in some cases, guys might actually win jobs. So I thought was kind of a weird way of making that statement. So you're saying battles don't often result in like job changes, which is I think what he means is like, look, you want competition, you want guys to push each other. So I mean, he's saying the right things in this regard, Trev, and this is one of those ones where like if you take the coaches at their word, and I don't know Joe Rudolph, so I don't have any reason to not take him at his word. I mean, he is saying that it sounds like he understands two things about this spring. One is it is hard to pick my best five at the end of spring because one guy that we think has a chance of being our best five isn't playing at all this spring. A second guy that has a chance to be in our best five is very limited and may not play all spring in Anthony Knapp. I was talking about Ashton Craig the first time. A guy that may be our best offensive lineman overall, potentially, is limited this spring as well, Billy Schrauth. Another guy that's battling to be a captain and a potential top guy in the room is limited this spring because he played so much in the fall. That's Emil Wagner. And then one of our three most talented players overall, we think, is not showing up till the summer, and Will Black. So it's like, okay, well, another young up-and-coming promising player is also not practicing this spring, and Christopher Tarrick, who I like quite a bit. Didn't love him when Notre Dame signed him, but really liked what I saw from him last spring and at times when we've seen him in practice. I thought he played very well when he got in games last year too, a couple times. So he's saying, like, look, how can you really have a true battle for your starting five by the end of spring when half of your group's not even practicing? That's a very fair statement, Trevor. But I'm also, again, giving him the benefit of the doubt that he is saying that in some cases somebody has a maybe. This is his words. He goes, there's going to be some battles. There's going to be guys that can compete with them to be able to raise the bar. So basically what he's saying is the battles, the first thing he talked about as far as battles is not so-and-so pushing so-and-so to start. It's I'm asking this guy to make the starters better. That wasn't very encouraging. And then the second part was, and maybe in some cases, win the job. That's not very encouraging to me because what that tells me is I know what my starting five is going to be. But I'll let these other guys battle to maybe make the starters better. And maybe in some cases, somebody might win a job. That's not overly encouraging to me, Trev, because that sounds like somebody's going to have to just play so much better than another guy. It's like you're acting as if like all these guys are like 30-game starters, when in reality, Emil Wagner is now your most experienced offensive lineman. Started 1 year. One full season, because Billy Schrauth started 11 games last year, and then 3 games the year before. Ashton Craig only has 6 career starts. Anthony Knapp has 15. Charles Jagusah has 3. It's kind of like because you were put in a position to start earlier than somebody else for whatever reason, you're now just the de facto starter unless something like. That's how I'm kind of reading into his comments a little bit, Trev. Am I reading too much into that? I just got very not discouraged, but concerned about the fact that he basically said competition is first and foremost the backups making the starters better. I look at it like this, which is you're going to compete for a job, and that is going to raise the bar. Not the primary job of a battle is to raise the bar for the starter, which is essentially what he's saying. And then maybe in some cases that actually means somebody beats somebody out. That doesn't seem like imagine if Gino Guidugli said that about the quarterback job. Well, the job of CJ and Kenny is to really just raise the bar for Steve. And then maybe they have a shot to win the job. Like imagine the uproar that would be there with rightfully so if that were the case there. That comment, Trev, in one instance that you're like, okay, I appreciate the struggle in picking your best five. But then that comment kind of that was a bit of a head scratcher for me to make me say, like, do you understand how this whole competition thing works?
Yeah.
It also gives a lot of insight into some of the decisions maybe he's made the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think the best word for me personally, the best way I could describe it is a little discouraging because you would think that going into a season like this, with the talent that you have, albeit the most proven talent that you have from a number of snap standpoint is Emil Wagner and then probably Anthony Knapp. And I think one of the toughest parts about that is you go through and you think about what a true open competition means. I'm glad you brought up the quarterback battle because that's what we've talked about so much this offseason. It's not the who, it's the how. It's how you get to who your starter is going to be is what's going to dictate it. If Steve truly beats out Kenny and CJ in a competition where everything's equal, let's ride. If Kenny beats out CJ and Steve and vice versa, the list goes on and on. But that is what I look for in an open competition. An open competition isn't, to me, this is your job until it gets taken from you. I don't view it that way. I will say the offensive line, and I've never coached offensive line. I've never been a football coach. But the way that I look at it, and Brian, you can correct me if I'm wrong because you have been a football coach, but I think at certain positions, especially at offensive line, barring you having a Joe Alt type of guy, which we don't know if this offensive line room has. Like talent-wise, they could, but barring somebody going from like Joe Alt 22 to Joe Alt 23, I don't know if you can say like everybody's job is just that's what their job is.
Right.
When you have a room that's this loaded with talent, which Notre Dame continues to recruit this position at a high level, like we've watched them do for the last, call it X amount of years, this is going to be something that Joe Rudolph is going to have to get accustomed to. You know, between injuries and people playing when not expected, how do you reach your lineup? And that's something that I'm paying attention to. I personally don't like the approach of, well, you started at that position last year, so that's just yours until somebody else takes it. Because caveat for me, nobody had the Joe Alt season. Nobody had the Ronnie Stanley season. Nobody had the Quentin Nelson season. So for me, it's all options are on the table. But this approach to me is, well, this is what I believe the starting five should be until shown otherwise, but I'm not expecting to be shown otherwise. That's how I took it. So in that aspect, I'm a little discouraged.
Yeah, it was interesting. It's for sure interesting. I mean, I do believe that when a guy starts as much as a Knapp did, as much as a Wagner did, as much as to a degree Billy Schrouth has, that you should be certainly better. And that's a position where it's like all things equal, I'm going to go with the guy that's played more. And that's true in most positions. I think you have to be better, but the question is, how much better does a guy have to be to get it to trump the experience piece? And that's a challenge for a lot of coaches, Trevor. And I don't know that there's like a formula for that. So yeah, it's a very interesting thing to look at, Trev, because. And then there's the piece that, like, we also can't assume that just because a guy played a certain way a year ago, that's how he's going to be now. And this unknown commodity that we love so much as a high school recruit is clearly the better player, which kind of adds to this stuff too, because we can critique Anthony Knapp all day long, for example, because we watched some of the struggles he had last year. We don't know what Gerby Lambert would have done in that situation. We don't know what Tosh Baker would have done in that situation. We don't know what Styles Prescott would have done in that situation. We don't know what Will Black would do if he was thrust into a similar situation because they didn't play. So it becomes very easy to pick apart the game of the guy who has played and just assume all the best qualities in the guy who hasn't played. We kind of see that a little bit at quarterback, right? Like the people that are very anti-Steve Angeli, and I've made my opinion on Steve Angeli known. I don't think he should be the starting quarterback at Notre Dame, but he has played, so we can more easily pick apart the things he's done wrong if you're anti-Steve Angeli, and then say, well, Kenny and Steve wouldn't have made that play. You have no idea. Well, of course Kenny and Steve can throw checkdowns all practice or all day on a drive like Steve did against Penn State. Do we really know that? Because it's still a pressure-packed situation. He still got the ball where he needed to get the ball to. We don't know the answer to that. And then on the flip side, it's the people who are that are pro-Angeli and anti, Carr or whatever, or just it could just be pro-Angeli. They'll say, well, look what Steve did here. As if like, well, you don't know that those guys wouldn't have done the same thing or better. You don't know what he led him on a field goal drive. Well, how do you know that Kenny or CJ might not have led him on a touchdown drive? Like, you don't know the answer to that. And that's kind of what makes this a challenge too. And what adds some spark to this debate from a fan standpoint is because we sort of get into these camps and say, well, Joe Rudolph did this, so that means this, and that means he's wrong. What makes him wrong? Because he did it last year and it didn't work out. Like, all right, cool, but maybe he's actually changed in his approach, but the result is still what it would have been otherwise. That's what adds a lot to this debate. But when you don't let us see more practice, then we're left to parse words in a press conference and stuff like that. That's the other part of it. Some other things that T talked about during the press conference that I thought were at least worth talking about. He had some comments about Charles Jagusah, and he talked about Jagusah getting reps at guard. And this is kind of what he said. He was talking about do your best to get the best 5 guys in the field. I think Charles has great flexibility with what he can do, so that's the biggest reason why they're working him at guard. And then he goes on to say talking about his work at the end of the year. He goes, if you put the film on when he was at the Penn State game and you watched him, you would be like, oh, who's that dude? And you don't do that with a lot of offensive linemen. There's a lot going for a guy to stand out that way. So when you see something who maybe could be as good as anyone in the country or better, you kind of keep developing in that spot as well. What I found interesting about that comment is it followed, I believe he spoke downstairs first, then came upstairs to you guys. What I thought about, what was interesting about that was he had just talked about Jagusah in the version that people can watch on TV. And I read those comments and I was like, boy, that doesn't seem overly encouraging. Like, is this guy like down on Jagusah or something like that? Like it was a very weird comment. Like he felt the need to first talk about, some things that maybe Jagusah did wrong, or he didn't do this well, or didn't do that well. And he wasn't perfect. And his vibe just came across as like very very odd. I'll just say, but then he comes up to the top and he says this, and you're like, okay, that tracks more with what I have heard some other instances. So I think when you look at this, a lot of times it's easy for us to say, we think he's in love with Anthony Knapp, and that's why he's putting Anthony Knapp at left tackle and Jagusah to guard. And there may be some truth to that, and I think there is some truth to that. But, Trev, the other part of it, too, is you have to look at it from this standpoint. I've talked to a couple sources about the old offensive line situation. And what I was told by somebody was this. Part of Joe Rudolph's thinking is, I do think part of it is him thinking Anthony Knapp is really good. And we're going to read what he said about Anthony Knapp later. But I was told this by somebody that shared with me a conversation they had with Joe Rudolph. So I'm going to share some serious inside baseball stuff. And the comment was this, because this is a conversation that we've had and that fans have had. He goes, I think, basically it was like this. I think Charles Jagusah could be a pretty good left tackle. But I think Charles Jagusah can be an elite guard and one of the best players in the country at guard. And he goes, and he said this Penn State thing, I laughed when I heard that Penn State thing, because that's not the first time I've heard this. Because I had somebody said, like, what he did against Penn State at guard was like eye-opening for the staff. Like, yes, we think this guy can play left tackle for us, as we saw in the bowl game. But at guard, he was special. And when you're an inside zone duo team like Notre Dame is, you want a butt kicker at guard. And that's kind of the thinking that kind of goes into it. So in that regard, I'm actually, like somebody in the chat said, I'm surprised at how, I guess I'd have to go find the question, but somebody said something like, I'm surprised at how comfortable people are with Jagusah guard. And I think that the Penn State game is a big part of the reason for that, Trev, because when a lot of us, I think it was Iden Benami. Let me find Iden's comment here, but I think Iden said it. Let me find it, because I thought it was a very interesting comment, because I think it speaks to a lot of people's thoughts. There's a lot of people think this to be true, that Charles Jagusah might be your best left tackle on your team right now, like for the 2025 season. But also that Charles Jagusah might be your best guard in 2025. So then the question is, okay, where are we more comfortable with the other players filling out, tackle or inside? Here's Iden's comment. He says, I didn't expect so many people to be okay with Charles the guard. I think it's a very fair comment. But I think there's some context to that needs to be understood. And not always framing it as, well, he's just doing that to get Charles out of the tackle battle with Knapp because he loves Knapp. Maybe there's something to that. But I also think people need to understand at how impactful Jagasal's performance against Penn State at guard was in thinking about what is the makeup of our offensive line need to look like. Because when that dude was playing guard, we had an elite – because what did we say? You need star power to emerge. I don't know that they think Jagasol can be a star at tackle. I think Joe Rudolph thinks he can be pretty good, but not star. And when I say star, I'm thinking like Joe Alt, like Liam Eichenberg 2020, Aaron Banks 2020, Quentin Nelson, any year he started, Alex Bars 2018 before he got hurt, Ronnie Stanley, Mike McGlinchey 17, like Zach Martin 2012 and 2013, like star, anchor, like we can go against anybody because we got that dude. I don't think he is that. I don't think that some people on staff think that Jagasol is that at tackle. He's good, but he's not that. And I wonder if part of that is they've convinced himself he's not that because of how easy it is to evaluate him doing that at guard.
Another thing that crossed my mind too, because there's obviously a lot of talk about Charles Jagusah, Anthony Knapp at left tackle. In the same light, a lot of people are also talking about Anthony Knapp projecting more to the inside. We've talked about that a lot on this show. Maybe one of the things that it came down to, again, this is a little bit projection and assumption here, but maybe if they look at what the gap is between Charles Jagusah and Anthony Knapp at left tackle versus what the gap is with Charles Jagusah and Anthony Knapp at right guard, that could also feed their decision to say, like, okay, we think that Charles Jagusah is a better right guard than Anthony Knapp in comparison to whatever level we think that it is between Charles and Anthony at left tackle. And then maybe the competition opens up for somebody else. Or maybe it's just Anthony Knapp at left tackle. Who knows? There's a lot of different things that go into it. But I was kind of thinking about that a little bit yesterday with how he was talking about Charles and how he performed at right guard. Maybe that fed into the decision of, well, we just believe that the gap is greater at right guard. So instead of keeping Jags at left tackle and moving Anthony Knapp in at right guard and seeing how he performs there. Or
letting Sullivan Absher compete for that job at right guard, which apparently they don't seem that they're going to do. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Right.
Mm-hmm. But maybe they just think that he projects that much greater on the interior. You're talking about Charles Jagusah. And so that was a thought that I did have yesterday. Potentially that's kind of what fed into their decision. And so that's another thing to continue to evaluate as the offseason goes on. Like I said, some of this is just kind of piecing things together from press conferences due to limited availability. But it's going to be something that's going to be interesting to see how it unfolds as the offseason continues to progress.
I also think that I have a hard time believing that Joe Rudolph would ignore the obvious if the obvious presented itself in this battle. Meaning, if it was obvious that so-and-so was just clearly better than so-and-so, I have a hard time thinking he would then just not play that guy. I also have a hard time believing that, well, my internal debate is, but in 2022, it should have been obvious that Billy Strauss should have been playing over Pat Coogan. Okay, fair. But it's a different world for Notre Dame now because now you have Mike Denbrock as your offensive coordinator who's coached the offensive line at this level. And so then I say, well, you're going to tell me that Mike Denbrock's going to just make it obvious, even though it's obviously that so-and-so should be playing over so-and-so. He's just going to let that keep happening because he doesn't want to rock the boat. That may have been true of Jared Parker. And I don't know that Jared Parker believed he had the authority to veto assistant coaches the way that Mike Denbrock can. Which is fair because of the circumstances of his promotion to that role. I get that. But so the other part too is if you are a Gerby Lambert, if you are a Sullivan Absher, if you are a Will Black, if you are a Matty Augustine who impressed me, if you are a Styles Prescott, if you are a Joe Otting, you kind of got to make it to where it's like, dude, you got a shot here to do something to where you make me have to play you. And my response is, whatever you think of Anthony Knapp, if we're having an honest conversation, you know what he can do. So if you're going to want to play over him, you're going to have to make me want to not to put him on the bench. And who can do that? I mean, speaking of his comments on Anthony Knapp, this gives you a little bit of an insight. I think there's a big difference of opinion between what the Notre Dame coaches think of Anthony Knapp and what I think of Anthony Knapp, and then what the fan base thinks of Anthony Knapp, because I feel like there's kind of three different things. I think the coaches feel this way. I'm kind of in the middle. I think the fans are kind of over here because of how last season went. But they have they seem to have a very high opinion of him. And here's what he said about Anthony Knapp. He says he was pretty unique coming in. I thought he would factor in more at internal positions. This is something that you had mentioned to me, Trev, when we were talking about it. At internal positions like center guard, he was just so natural playing out there, and he's got really good length. True. The average tackle height is 6'5" in the NFL. It's not 6'8". That's the outlier. He just really does some things that helped us and gave us some strength and power and consistency out there. We thought he played really well, so we'll see. But he does have flexibility as well. That is such an odd comment to me, because he's not the only person that I've talked to that's talked about the steadiness of Anthony Knapp and consistency of Anthony Knapp. And that blows my mind, because unless you say consistently struggles with pass pro, I mean, like it blows my mind. But I wonder if they're looking at it from the standpoint of just for his age, is the steadiness in practice, and they know that as he gets more experience, more strength, that steadiness will then show in games. That could be it. That could be what they're looking at. It's a very interesting question. A couple of responses is the whole 6'5" in the NFL thing. That's such a useless comment, because it's not about height. I've said this a million times. It's not about height. It's about length and girth. And I don't care if an offensive lineman's 6'8". You've never heard me say, you got to start this guy at tackle because he's 6'7". Never said that one time. You've got to have length. Length isn't always height. Remember the kid that played was Isaiah, what was his name? The kid for Georgia a couple years ago that played left tackle and was a really good player for Georgia. But he was 6'2". I don't care about that. It's more so about length for me. But the bigger question that I have, Trevor, that kind of bothered me, Isaiah Wynn, that's what I'm talking about. And then so he's 6'2". He's got to play, guard in the NFL. And I think they ended up keeping him at tackle in the NFL too. So, okay, cool. Let's go with that. But the average size of offensive tackles in the NFL is also 315 pounds. So if we're gonna talk about the outliers, what outlier do you care more about? A guy's height or a guy's weight? So I just thought that comment was a little bit annoying, but that is sort of the intriguing thing is you want to play Anthony Knapp. You think he's one of your best five. Are you going to move him into center where he can battle with Ashton Craig, who you think is one of your leaders and played well? And when he played, you're not going to put him at guard to go against Jagasaw and Shrouth, because you've already convinced yourself that Jagasaw's a guard. So then you're going to have him a tackle. And so then it gets to, well, if someone's going to have to beat him out, then they're going to, here's where I think the struggle is that we as fans need to think about as we're having this debate, because I do think that it's fair to question Joe Rudolph's decision-making, but I'm trying to sort of give us all something to think about in both directions. If a guy started 15 games for a team that went 14-1 in the 15 games he's played in, shouldn't it be kind of not easy to kind of just remove him from that role? And they clearly had no problem telling Rocco and Pat Coogan their jobs weren't secure. So it's not like they're just saying, well, because you started 15 games, you're locked into a starting job. They see something in Anthony Knapp at left tackle that makes them think, if we're going to move away from that, something better be pretty obvious to us. And then the question for that, Trev, is, well, what is that thing? And that gets into the debate that we have is what should the line look like? And we'll get to that later. But I just wanted to throw that comment in there before we kind of get to the debate of what should the offensive line look like and what should the battles be. But the thing we have to acknowledge is the Notre Dame coaching staff, we saw the 15 games he played. And I hate when people do this in a way to shut down debate. And that's not what I hate when people say, well, you weren't at practice. So I watched the game. I don't care what practice did. If you suck in the games, I don't care how good you are in practice, in theory. But when you're talking about a true freshman, you have to be willing to say clearly that he did something in practice that has instilled confidence in more than just Joe Rudolph when it comes to the coaching staff. Because if Mike Denbrock held the same opinion about Anthony Knapp at left tackle that some of the fan base does, or if Marcus Freeman had the same opinion of Anthony Knapp that a chunk of the fan base does, they would step in and tell Joe Rudolph, move him or put somebody else there. So clearly they saw something in practice that makes them think once this kid has some more experience, he's got a chance to do such and such. I think that we at least have to acknowledge that there's that belief in the coaching staff and what he brings to the table.
Where I've kind of had to, I guess you could call it adjust my thinking, is I've had to check myself sometimes and say, why does the buck stop with Anthony Knapp? If you take some of the conversations that we're having, big picture about being a true freshman, it's like, yo, what happened to Cam Williams? Thought he was this highly touted guy. He did nothing less. Hey, guys, he's a true freshman. He's 18 years old. Let's give him some time. Yo, Bryce Young is 6'7", 260. He had 1.5 sacks last year. What's going on? Well, he's a true freshman. Guys, like, let's pump the brakes for a second. But then once we start talking about Anthony Knapp, there's so many better options. I don't see how he has to be the guy that's starting. What's going on here? Like, that is something that I've kind of been thinking about over the last couple of days.
Which is fair to a degree. It is absolutely fair to a degree. Continue. Sorry, Trev.
Yeah.
Continue.
Which again, the conversation's also different because guys like Cam Williams, he wasn't a starter. Bryce Young wasn't a starter. Anthony Knapp was deemed the starter and was a starter for 15 consecutive games. And so there are certain aspects of that conversation that are fair, especially when you look at the rest of the makeup of the room. Even with some of the other players that I mentioned, like guys like a Cam Williams, all due respect to some of the former players from that 24 team, I appreciated what they did. And I don't know if it is just based on something that was seen in the offense or the makeup of the offense overall, but I have to believe that Cam Williams could have came in and done what Chris Mitchell did to a degree. You know what I mean? It's like, so there are similar conversations to be had with some of the other players that I mentioned. But that is something to keep in mind is maybe Anthony Knapp takes that freshman to sophomore year jump. Brian, you mentioned that maybe that's what they're seeing is they were projecting a little bit about his consistency level. Maybe they're talking about that relative to him being a true freshman. That was the major takeaway of that comment for me that I disagreed with. Like, you want to talk about his length? Agreed. You can see that. You want to talk about his power? We saw that as a run blocker. But it's tough when you sit down every Saturday and you have 15, call it 14 and a half games of a sample size. And consistency was the biggest issue for me. And so I think that's what makes this conversation all the more interesting. And then when you start talking about guys like, Billy Schrouth and Pat Coogan and what went down there and taking a guy out of a starting lineup who did start and has that experience, it gives the feeling that sometimes it can be a little bit subjective, which is also makes it tough to gauge of what all is going to feed into this decision. So for me, it's just all of those things combined, I think it's what makes this conversation such an interesting one.
It is. And just so people understand, I'm not changing my tune that I think now Anthony Knapp should just be the anointed one at left tackle. I'm simply saying I think the debate here on the offensive line has kind of gotten to where a lot of the debates go, which it's either one extreme or the other. Coaches are right. They're always right. They never make mistakes. Clearly they see something. So just trust the coaches, which drives me friggin' nuts. And then the other one is, well, this guy was a 5-star recruit. This guy struggled as a true freshman. This guy's never given up a single pressure in his entire college career because he's not played in meaningful downs. So we should go with this guy over here because who's never made a mistake before because he doesn't play. And if this guy plays, it's clearly this, it's clearly that, it's clearly this negative thing. And the team, like I've seen people say, if Anthony Knapp starts a left tackle next year, they're going 8-4. I've literally seen that comment. I'm like, well, they just went 14-2, and then the pushback is, and this is a very fair pushback. It's a hyperbolic, big exaggeration, unnecessarily negative exaggeration. The pushback is, yeah, but he did that with Riley Leonard at quarterback, who was able to overcome some of those mistakes that CJ Carr, Kenny Minchie, Steve Angeli won't. Very fair. Very fair. And so I think it's an interesting conversation to have, Trev, because I do think that the play at left tackle has to get better. There's no debating that. It has to get better. Is that Anthony Knapp? Is that going to be Emil Wagner, Gerby Lambert, Charles? Because look, just because they're playing Charles Jagasaw at right guard right now, if they get into the first week of fall camp and all of a sudden, 2 weeks in the fall camp, all of a sudden Charles Jagasaw or the left tackle position is a problem, and Sullivan Absher's killing it at guard, or somebody's, there's no reason to say they can't move Jagasaw back to left tackle. He showed he could play guard for a month, and then in a week move to left tackle and block Jack Sawyer and J2, you know what I mean, like JTT and the guys at Ohio State. If he can do that, he can in 3 weeks get ready to play against Miami and Texas A&M. You know what I'm saying? So I do think that this spring is an opportunity, in my opinion, to see what other guys can do. See what Gerby Lambert can do at left tackle. See what Gerby Lambert can do at left tackle. See what Styles Prescott can do at left tackle. The struggle is because we aren't there, we're just relying on what they're telling us. Hey, we're giving Gerby Lambert a shot at left tackle. Well, the practice where Emil and Anthony Knapp were both out, I only saw him play right tackle and right guard. That's all I saw him at. So I can't tell you if they're giving him a real shot at left tackle. I've been told by some people that Emil Wagner have a shot at left tackle, but I haven't seen him do it yet. So it's like, it's hard to know what they're going to do. And I think that's where a lot of the frustration comes from, Trevor, is that I think a lot of people can buy that this guy may end up being the best option at left tackle. I think a lot of people would be okay with Anthony Knapp being the left tackle next year if they felt he was that because of a true, honest competition that he won. And that's a little bit of an unfair thing for Anthony Knapp, because he didn't win the job by earning it, as in a way that people think. He didn't go into fall camp and just beat out a returning starter or something like that. But he did also kind of earn it in that once Jagasaw went down, they felt he was the best option of all the other tackles on the roster. And he earned it in that regard. So I think how they go about this, and if the staff was smart, they would stop trying to hide things so much, like all coaches do, and I would be doing if I was a coach still, and say, hey, look, let people see that you're giving this guy some chances at left tackle. Let people see Emil Wagner getting some reps at left tackle. Let people see Gerby Lambert getting a shot at left tackle. And then if they don't perform well, then we're kind of like, yeah, okay, now we know. Now we know why that is. And so I think that's going to be an important piece of this, is how they handle this is going to go a long way towards determining if, Notre Dame fans are willing to just accept the fact that, he is the best guy for the job. And I think that's also good for Anthony Knapp's. I mean, look, fan opinion matters, man. I mean, talk to any player and they'll tell you that they read the stuff that's said about them. And they were, Sean Davis had a guy on the show the other day, played Notre Dame, talked about, just some of the reactions that you get from fans. They hear the boos or whatever the case may be. And you're going to increase the chances that fans get disgruntled with a player if you allow the narrative to go a certain way, and without addressing it with not what you say, but what we what we get a chance to see, then you're doing a disservice to that player as well by allowing that to grow, that cancer to grow, because you didn't want to let, things out or whatever the case may be. But then you also maybe don't want to let things out because you're trying to build something, like that's where the coaches are going to push back. Well, we're trying to do this and that and the other thing. And that gets me to a whole nother debate. So I think this tackle conversation is really good. We're going to kind of break this show in half, Trev. It's going to be a little different than like different topics, but we're kind of at that halfway point here at the hour mark. And before we get to hour 2 and some more things I want to talk about that Joe Rudolph said, and really getting into what is the best 5, what could the best 5 be for this team. Before we get to that, I did want people to do us a favor before we move on to part 2 of the show. Hit that like button for us and make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Make sure you have notifications turned on, and then also make sure you're signed up for the message board, because we always put the show up on the message board. We tweet it out. So you can follow me at Coach D178. You can follow Trev at is it TT Row 05?
Yeah, T-Tro 5.
I think TT Row is a lot easier for people to understand. I'm just kidding. 05,
What?
right? I'm joking with you.
Yeah.
T-Tro
at
at 05. So you can find him there, and he always retweets out the show and stuff too. So you can definitely check us out. And that's also, we'll put all of our tweet all of our articles out, or most of our articles out on there too. So definitely do that, because being on the message board is still the best way to go. I did 2 film breakdowns yesterday, or like quick prospect analysis. I did Caden Finley, and then I also did Mason James, who are both visiting this week. 2 big-time receivers that I would love to see Notre Dame land in the 2026 class are going to be on campus this week. One is from Texas. That's Caden Finley. We've broken down his game on the show. The other's Mason James, who might be one of my favorite prospects in this class, Trev. Problem is, he's from Norman, Oklahoma, and he's been to Oklahoma about a dozen times. It's going to be tough, but he is coming to campus. So they're going to get their shot to make a run at him. So we'll talk. We talked about that, and we'll obviously have some recruiting updates on the board as well. So you can check that out at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So Trev, I want to continue this offensive line conversation, because there are some unique aspects to it, because some of the most talented guys that you have are guys that haven't really had a chance to prove a lot for you as a team. And 2 guys that I think that I think it's very interesting to kind of see what they've done. One is Sullivan Absher, because I think he's a very talented player. I think he's shown that at times. I thought he was pretty good playing left tackle in the bowl game when he came in off the bench. I thought he's been pretty good at times at guard. I think he's a guy that needed a lot of work. But from what Joe Rudolph is saying about him, and from what they're doing with him, to me tells 2 different stories. And from what I can read, is it sounds like right now Sullivan Absher is not a guy that's pushing for a starting job. That they're turning him into sort of a super sub. And the fact that Anthony Knapp is not the guy that maybe they're working on getting some snaps. Now that could change, because right now I don't think Anthony Knapp is doing anything. And was he a guy that was listed? He was a guy that was listed as modified in the thing, not completely out. But Joe Rudolph made a comment about getting some guys back at the end of spring, and I wonder if that's Anthony Knapp, because I haven't seen him do anything like drills, like warm-ups, nothing. So obviously you can't get him work at center. So it's like, okay, is he going to get some work at center? Are they going to try to cross-train him? Because I know this, like Joe Rudolph said it, he can do other things. He can project other things. But right now you can't work him anywhere else. You got to work somebody at center. Who's it going to be? And I'm sitting there thinking, like, you picked Sullivan Absher of all the guys to play. He's like 6'7". And I started thinking about, well, who are your other options, dude? Charles Jagasol, who's 6'7", South Prescott, who's 6'6", Matty Augustine, who's 6'7", Owen Strebig, who's 6'8", Gerby Lambers, who's 6'7". Like, you didn't have a lot of options, because Chris Tarrick's out, Anthony Knapp's out, Billy Strouth is limited. I mean, so there's all these things to look at, and you're like, okay, like, and that's where the availability of players makes it challenging to read what's going on. But the fact that they're giving him work at center, I thought is interesting. Here's what Joe Rudolph said about Sullivan Absher. He says, him and Joe Wadding and Cam Herron They're getting the majority of the reps this spring. Those guys are learning it, and it expands their roles. I've been excited from what I've seen. They've done good. Sully's done a really good job. It's hard to know two spots and to learn them like that. He's embraced it. And then they said, he said something about Sullivan Absher made a comment about his goals to make it impossible for him, not to play. Joe Rudolph's response was, I see it in him. I see him continue to get better, not worry about anything else, but focus on what he needs to do to get better. And it shows up. His battle right now is just consistency. We're trying to give him every opportunity to compete and get out there. He will. There's no question he's going to play a lot of ball here. So there's kind of contradictory type of things out there. There's that comment that makes it sound like he's getting a shot. And then there's the fact that what's he playing right now? Center and right guard? He's not beating out Charles Jagasaw. But here's the thing. As I said before, it seems to me like they're just kind of grooming him to be a super sub. Can play tackle, can play guard, can play center. Which says two things. Number one, the negative is that he's not going to get a chance to start. The positive it is they're not doing that for a guy that they don't think can play. So, they just don't feel he's one of the best five right now. Otherwise, they'd be putting him one place to play. But the counter to that is, even if he is playing the position that Charles Jagasaw's playing, if the left tackles are struggling, Jagasaw's balling out, Sullivan's balling out, I repeat again, there's nothing stopping this staff after the spring of saying, we're going to move Jagasaw back to left tackle. Because 75 has earned his right to be in that position of right guard. There's nothing stopping them from doing that. And that's why I think the thing for Sullivan Absher is listening to him talk. You talk to him upstairs, Trev. You talk to him for a little bit upstairs. Saying it publicly is he's saying, hey, listen, I'm just out there to work. I'm out there to grind, and I'm out there to make it to where they have to play me. That's about as good of an attitude as one of those kids can have right now. I don't care where they play me. I'm going to dominate the spot I'm at, because even though I'm buried here, if I dominate and play consistently and play to the level I can, it's going to force them to figure it out. And with a guy like Jagasaw, you can do that because you can move Jagasaw somewhere else. Whether that's because you need to start Sullivan Absher or somebody gets hurt and you now have to move someone somewhere and let him get an opportunity to play. And if you're Sullivan Absher, you also keep grinding because, as you saw the last 2 years, injuries can open up opportunities for people to play. And we saw that each of the 2 years he's been on campus with obviously Coogan going down and Rocco and Zeke Carell Rocco and Zeke going down in 2023. And then this past year, Jagasaw going down, then Craig went down, then Schrouth went down, then Knapp went down, and then Rocco went down again. It just, that's been true. And so it's like, hey, keep grinding because your opportunity may come either by you forcing your way into the lineup or somebody gets hurt and then you step in and it's like you just Wally pipped somebody. Mm. And so it's really strange trying to read what their thoughts are on Sullivan Absher, because in one regard, you're like, they clearly don't think he's one of the five best. But the only way they'd play him all these different positions is if they felt like this kid is a really good football player that we're going to have sort of be a super sub to where if there is something that goes down, we got a shot to pop that guy in where he needs to play.
Yeah, I think it's tough looking at both sides of the coin with a guy like Sullivan Absher, because you have to tip your hat to the young man who is able to get thrown into so many different spots and do well enough that he's getting recognition at all of the spots that he's performing in. Where I get a little bit frustrated outside looking in is, again, it's around the consistency comment. It's, the thing that we're looking from him, Joe Rudolph said, is consistency. Well, it's hard to be a consistent player when the platform that you're allowed to perform on is an inconsistent platform. I think that's tough. Now, I think that's tough, and that's not specific to Sullivan Absher. That's tough for anybody.
Especially when you're young.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when you get moved at this spot this week and this spot this day, Sullivan Absher, I was upstairs talking to him. Great young man, very polite. He was awesome. It was really cool to sit down and talk.
He's a great kid.
He was awesome.
Great family too, yeah.
And we sat down and we talked, and it was in a joking manner, but it kind of opened your eyes up to some things. And it was, one of the other writers asked him and was like, "Hey, when was the first time you took snaps?" And his answer was, let's see, today's March 26th. I would say about a month ago. And that's a kid that loves this place. That is a kid that, and especially in this day and age of transfer portal and NIL and all this other stuff, I'm sure that there would be a lot of schools foaming at the mouth to get a 6'7", 6'8", 320-pound kid. And I love this place. I'm willing to do what they're asking me and do that to my highest ability. So like I said, on one side of the coin, it's great that the coaching staff trusts that he has the ability to do multiple things. And two, Sullivan Absher's done these things and done it to a degree where the coaches don't watch him do it. And they're like, ooh, yeah, that's not it. Like he's done it well enough where they're like, yeah, he's working. We just need to see the consistency. Then you flip the coin over and it's like, okay, well, if you want to see consistency from him, let's put him in a setting where he has the ability to be consistent. And so that's kind of the ongoing battle with Sullivan Absher. But he is somebody that I do think could make a push to start somewhere, given what the position may be, what the outlook of the rest of the offensive line is, because this goes back to Brian's first point. It's tough to gauge where people are at when Emil Wagner's on a pitch count, when Billy Schrouth is kind of on a pitch count, when Anthony Knapp isn't on the field right now, when Ashton Craig isn't on the field right now. Those four guys that I listed all started games last year for Notre Dame. So it's really tough to kind of gauge where people are at in that context. But yeah, but moral of the story, sitting down with Sullivan, he's a kid that loves Notre Dame and he's willing to do what he can to make the push to get on the field and play for him. So that's my biggest takeaway from that one.
He had some positive say about Styles Prescott, which I was happy to see. He was a kid that I liked coming out of high school. So it's kind of funny to see the reaction to Styles Prescott playing left tackle. And I'll be honest, I had the original thought too. I was like, well, if he's the guy playing left tackle, then clearly they're just holding that spot for Anthony Knapp. And I'm thinking, hold on a second. Dude, you liked Styles Prescott a lot coming out. So what's to say that the staff doesn't think he can play that position and he's getting an honest shot to play that position? Here's what Joe Rudolph said about him. He said, I think you said it. Like last year, you saw a few things, but most of the time he was recovering. So that's a journey because he was injured a lot last year. Yet you get somewhere, you get on campus, you're excited to go, and then you can't go. It's a journey you take, just making it to the point to get to practice here, and you're going. But he flashes, man. You see him do some really good things. He brings great energy. He's excited. He's not timid in his approach. I really like what he's done so far, so I'm excited to see him. So this is a great this brings a great opportunity for Styles Prescott to show what he can do. Because we're all sitting there thinking like, it's got to be Gerby. It's got to be Gerby. It's got to be Gerby. Well, Styles Prescott was a pretty highly ranked guy coming out too by me, and I know On3 had him there as well. So this is also a chance for you to get to see what you have in him at left tackle. Like, does this kid have some ability to help us there or not? And he's getting that chance as well. But at the end of the day, the guy that is if this player wasn't on campus, I think the debate about Anthony Knapp would be a lot different. And that's Gerby Lambert. When I see Gerby, and there's a couple clips of him in the practice video so when I know everybody else kind of does practice video and they just put it out for all to see. That's one of the things that I do just for board members only. So I only put that video on the board. But I had running backs and O-line, and there's a few clips of Charles Jagasaw. And the thing you'll see when he's on there is he's incredibly big. He's incredibly long, and he's pretty talented. And so the thought is, and he was a 5-star recruit. You know, I had him as a 5-star. 2On3 had him as a 5-star. I'm not sure where everybody else had him, to be honest with you, because I don't often, Trev, I don't often look at where everybody's ranked all the time. But I know that On3 had him as a 5-star because we talked about it. Rivals had him as the number 37 overall player in the country. So, and then I had him as a top 25 player as well. So he's a guy that was a consensus. Well, 247 had him lower than the others, but they still had him in the top 100, number 88 overall. And then ESPN had him 94th. So he's a consensus top 100 player. 2 people, including myself, had him as a 5-star. And you see the tools and you're like, dude, that's what a big-time offensive lineman is supposed to look like. 6'7", 334, like vines for arms. Incredibly, whatever hyperbole you use to describe long arms fits there. And He's athletic for that size, and he's powerful. And you hear some things, and you say that's a guy that should have a shot to start. Let's read first Joe Rudolph's comments about Gerby Lambert. We're going to kind of talk about him along with Emil Wagner. It's going to be an interesting conversation. But here's what he said about Gerby Lambert. The question was, are you able to work Gerby Lambert at left and right tackle? Now, Joe Rudolph claims that Gerby's playing both. He said it in the video interview, and he said it upstairs with you guys. He said, no doubt, there were times last year we threw him at guard, and he jumped right in. He's got that to him where he brings a maturity, definitely working both left and right. And the question was, assume Lambert has a big spring opportunity after not getting heavy work in January. He goes, he gets tons of reps. He gets a ton of reps. Last year, he played in 4 games. We saved him. And then he was able to play in all 4 playoff games, which was good. Even though it was just field goal team, you're still out there in meaningful moments. Him, guys like Styles Prescott, Sullivan Absher will push those guys hard. Then there was a question about, would you move Emil Wagner to left side for Gerby on the right side? And he said, it's possible. It's possible. Right now, Gerby is more the one to move and get both sides of it. I don't know. It's a good question. When we get Emil back, it might be something we explore. And I talked to somebody else who said that that's something that they would consider as well. So my takeaway from his comments was, I do believe that Anthony Knapp right now is considered the guy to beat at left tackle. And they're viewing him being out the same way they're viewing Ashton Craig being out and Emil Wagner being limited and Billy Schrauth being limited. He's a starter. He's proven himself. Someone else is going to have to beat him out for him not to be the guy. That's fair. I'm okay with that. It seems like from comments made to here, comments I've gotten from other sources, that it's not a given that it's just going to be Wagner and Knapp at tackle. The question is going to be, where does Gerby, if Gerby Lambert proves himself too good to play, what does that look like for the makeup of the line? Does that mean he's at left tackle? Does it mean that Emil Wagner goes to left tackle? Does it mean that Anthony Knapp moves inside? There's a lot of things that kind of go into, if Gerby Lambert proves himself to be this, the question then is, I don't think it's an automatic, he goes to left tackle. That's going to make for very fascinating conversation, and then just some things that I'm looking for here over the next several months, Trev, because if Gerby Lambert proves himself as one of the 5 best, what do you do with him? I have some thoughts on it, Trev, but I want to get your initial thoughts first as we talk about this, because this is the guy that I think whose emergence, him forcing the coaching staff to play him, could have the biggest impact on what this offensive line looks like in 2015 or 2025. I just took a decade off of my life into 2025.
I think when you talk about a guy like Gerby Lambert, where he fits in, if he's proven to be one of the 5 best, let's just automatically eliminate center. I don't think if he proves he's one of the 5 best, I don't think you put him there. So really you have 4 other spots that you can work with him at. Left guard, if that's where Billy Schrauth is going to be, I don't know if Gerby Lambert goes in and dethrones a guy like Schrauth. So to me, you sit down and you think about, okay, between left tackle, right guard, right tackle, where does Gerby Lambert serve us best? And I think some of that is going to go into the performance of how some of the other players are performing at that level. You sit back and look at, okay, well, maybe Gerby gives us a better look at right tackle because of some of these things. Then you start talking about, like, if we're just having the tackle conversation, let's say you look at the 3 guys between Emil Wagner, Anthony Knapp, and Gerby Lambert. I think then Coach Rudolph has a decision to make in terms of, okay, who are the 2 best out of that group from a performance standpoint, and then who projects best where? Does that mean Emil moves to left? Does that mean Gerby goes to right? Does that mean Anthony Knapp stays at left and you insert Gerby at right? Or do you put either Emil Wagner or Gerby Lambert at left and you move Anthony Knapp to right? Depending on skill set, what have you. I don't really see a scenario where like Anthony Knapp starts at right tackle, but Emil doesn't. But again, all options on the table here. Or is it a scenario that you described? Is it Knapp's kind of struggling? Jags is on the list of the guys that absolutely has to play. Gerby Lambert's on a list of guys that absolutely has to play. So then I think it's a question of who projects better at tackle. Is it Charles Jagasaw? Or is it Gerby Lambert? In that case, I'd leave Jags at guard and I'd kick out of Gerby Lambert to one of the tackle spots. And so I think for a guy like Gerby Lambert, it's up to him to insert himself into that conversation of being the best five. But then, it comes a conversation of how those other spots are performing, assuming everybody's healthy. Because then the simple answer is, well, I mean, and you hope that it doesn't, but if somebody gets hurt, Gerby or guys like Sullivan or guys that, could easily insert themselves into the starting lineup. But assuming everybody's healthy, everybody's playing to the peak of their ability, I think to some degree, short answer, some of it then becomes out of Gerby Lambert's hands. His job is to make sure that, hey, you have to play me. I'm one of your 5 best offensive linemen. Then it's a question of where. And maybe the margin is as thin as what we were talking about in the quarterback competition yesterday. Of, man, you know what? Maybe CJ's hitting people here, but Kenny's hitting people here, or vice versa. It could be something as thin as that. But when you're talking about Notre Dame making it back to the national championship, you have to play your 5 best. Even if your 6th guy and your 7th guy is also still a really good football player, but just that 5th option gets you over that hump. And so that's how I kind of look at a guy like Gerby Lambert.
I haven't started talking yet. That's why I haven't. Because I'm just like, there's so many different layers to this. Because another thought I wanted is like, well, what if you feel that for the future, what if Will Black is who you view as your future left tackle? And maybe you see Emil Wagner as a guy that maybe 2025 season is his last, or Billy Schrouth might be his last. Do you want to put Gerby Lambert in there at left tackle over Will Black? And then are you going to move him to right tackle from left tackle at some point? There's so many different layers to this that I don't know how much of that goes into the thinking, to be honest with you. But for me, it definitely goes into the thinking of, just I think that I have a concern that Joe Rudolph is going to be unwilling to give Gerby Lambert the opportunity to learn on the job the way that he did Anthony Knapp, not because he necessarily favors Anthony Knapp, but because he doesn't have to do that with Gerby Lambert, where he kind of had to do that with Anthony Knapp. And that is one of those things where when you have a position coach, and I think it's easy for fans to just say start the more experienced guy, but when you're a football coach and your job is on the line with these decisions that you make, it's very easy to lean towards what you know. And that's a big factor in this conversation. So you get down to it and you say, okay, what do we feel good about saying right now? Billy Schrouth is going to start somewhere. Charles Jagasaw is going to start somewhere.
Yep.
Emil Wagner is going to start somewhere. Is Ashton Craig going to start somewhere? I don't know. He's not out there right now. Is Anthony Knapp going to start somewhere? I don't know. Is Gerby Lambert going to be allowed to force his way into the lineup? Don't know. Is Sullivan Absher going to get a chance to force himself into the lineup? I don't know. It didn't sound like Sullivan Absher felt super comfortable snapping the football from his conversations. Like, he's not there yet. I think he said during the video part of the interview, Trev, I think he said his first 12 were off, and then Rudolph was like, I love that kid's all. He's like, the first one he said was he said something like 5 feet or just way outside, right? Just not even close. He goes, and I think my first 12 were really bad. And then Coach Rudolph said something about, How about you try the dead ball? And that seemed to kind of work pretty well. And, was more comfortable with that. But it's just kind of like center's not the spot for him. So somewhere else is going to be. You've got another 5-star coming in the summer. I don't know that right now I'm worried too much about him because it's very hard for a freshman offensive lineman who doesn't get any work in the spring. And more importantly, doesn't get that extra 6 months of work in the weight room to step in and start as a freshman, especially at a place like Notre Dame. So then you figure it out. You say, okay, but then what is the best lineup for Notre Dame? And who plays where? And the thing that I would challenge you and say right now, Trevor, is I could make a case that right now none of the offensive linemen are playing the position that they could end up playing in 2025 in the fall. And here's why I say that. I don't think it's a given that Charles Jagusah should be at right guard and Billy Schrauth should be at left guard. Billy Schrauth began the season last year at right guard, not left guard. He moved to left guard because Sam Pendleton wasn't getting the job done at the time, and you weren't going to move Rocco to left guard. You're going to let him stay at right. You moved him over there. Does that decision get impacted by who starts at tackle? Right now, of course, it looks like Emil Wagner is going to be right tackle, but what if they say this? What if Gerby Lambert's just too good not to play, but he's not comfortable playing at left tackle? What do you do then? What if you do that and then you move Emil Wagner to left tackle and he's not comfortable at left tackle? Like, we're looking at this from like an NCAA 2025 standpoint, where in the video game, you just move a guy over to the left side. You may lose the point, gain the point, but you can just move him over to the left side and there's no problem. I do that in the video game all the time. Well, in real life, some guys can't play one side. You remember Bob Whitfield, who played offensive tackle for the Atlanta Falcons? I think he played left tackle. Well, he was blind in one of his eyes. So he can only play on one side of the line because he couldn't play on the other side because he was legally blind in his other eye. I mean, so not everybody can just move to the other side. Some guys aren't comfortable playing left-handed. Some guys aren't comfortable playing right-handed. I've had receivers before that I had a thing where like inside leg was always up. And I had this coach's kid one time who he just could not flip his feet and he had to have the one leg up the entire time, no matter where he was. You had to just kind of let him roll with it. Do I want him to do what I say because I said so? And at the time it was easy to do it because we weren't a steps team. Now what's difficult is, but what if your entire route package is built off steps, third steps? Some people teach slants off steps, posts off steps, outs off steps. This is a 5-step. This is a 3-step. This is a 7-step. Well, if you have that, your steps are going to be off because if you have your right leg up, your inside leg up, because it's 1, 2, 3 slant. Well, if your feet are wrong, then it's 1, 2, 3 is your inside foot. You can't freaking run a slant off your inside foot. So you're now cutting off 4. So the quarterback's throwing a 3-step slant. You're running a 4-step slant. And the ball's hitting you in the face as you turn around on the slant. There's a reason that you teach those certain things. So then what do? I either don't play that guy or I make sure he can only play on that one side that allows him to. I mean, there's a lot of different things that go into these decisions. And that's the challenge is we don't know that Gerby Lambert can play left tackle. We don't know that Emil Wagner can play left tackle. My challenge to Joe Rudolph is find out. Make them prove to you that they can't. And here's why. Even if you feel Anthony Knapp is your best player, if you don't find an answer for those two questions, can Emil Wagner play left tackle and can Gerby Lambert play left tackle, even if you believe that and Anthony Knapp is in fact your best left tackle, but what if he gets hurt again? Is your only answer to either move Jagusah back to left guard or left tackle after he's been playing right guard for 7 months? And then now you got to find a new guard? Or is your answer say, well, we're just going to have to play Will Black because he's the only other guy that can play left tackle? Right. So that's the thing is it's your job to find out if those guys can do it. And more importantly, work with them to do it, to get comfortable with it. to find out if a guy is just not coordinated enough to do that, or if a guy is coordinated, he's just his body's not trained to do that. Like, Trev, there's certain people that can use their right or left hand equally effectively. I've never been one of those people. My left arm has always been strong, but it's not like I've tried to write left-handed, can't do it. My wife can literally write with either hand. She can bowl with either hand. If I tried to bowl with my left hand, I can't guarantee the ball is actually going to stay on the lane that I'm trying to throw it down to. I'm not coordinated in that regard with my left arm and my left hand. My wife is. I mean, she does some things left-handed, some things right-handed. She writes left-handed, eats right-handed, plays pool right-handed, bowls right-handed, but she can also bowl left-handed. I can't do any of those things with my left hand. Like, you see me try to eat cereal with my left hand. It's a sight, man. It's a sight. I'm like, it's like, I can't do that. My wife can. Not everybody is coordinated to do certain things. So I look at it and say, you need to find that out. And then you also, but that doesn't mean throw them over there one day. It didn't look good. And then move them back. That's you. You've got an agenda and you're using that as proof to fit your agenda. I'm not saying Joe Rudolph's doing that. I'm just saying in general. Sean Davis just texted me. So Angela is the real talent in the family. I've never said otherwise. I thought we already agreed on that. I thought that was a given already. So, so that's what I need to see, Trev, is in here is that he's legitimately giving those two guys opportunities to play the other side. Not even if you feel Anthony Knapp is your left tackle, there's still merit to having one of those guys able to play that position, because if you think Gerby and Emil are both big-time players, but they can only play right tackle, then if your left tackle goes down, what's your answer over there? But so if you think one of them, they can both dominate a right tackle and be solid at left tackle, then if that guy goes down, at least you can move a solid guy over there who's massive. And now you don't have to move Jagasaw over there or put another freshman over there. There's all these scenarios that go into it. And maybe one of those guys gets comfortable doing that. I don't know. And that's my big question mark for Joe Rudolph is, will you allow that to happen? I think that's the biggest fear that some people in the chat have. And I think too many people are just assuming he won't. And I don't think that's really fair to assume that. Because the same guy that didn't think that made a mistake with Billy Schrauth is the same guy that basically now is looking at Billy Schrauth as the leader of his room. Something changed. Somewhere along the lines, Billy Schrauth earned his trust. Why should we assume that he won't allow someone else to do that at another position? So while there's evidence that he makes some poor decisions, there's also evidence that he's allowed his decision to be altered. He didn't think Rocco Spindler was good enough to start over Sam Pendleton last year to begin the season. Now, injury forced Rocco into the starting lineup, but what happened when Billy came back? He didn't put Billy right back into right guard and leave, Sam Pendleton left guard. He put Billy at left guard and left Rocco in the starting lineup. His opinion changed. So we've seen him allow his opinion to change. The question is, does it require injuries and a long period of evidence of a player proving him wrong, like Rocco did last year, to get him to change his mind? Can he do it in practice? And that's a very fair question. That's a very fair question. Over here, he's going to have to force that issue. If for any other reason other than you need to establish depth at that position, even if you believe Anthony Knapp is the guy. So Gerby Lambert needs an opportunity to perform. Emil needs to be considered for that position. I want to wrap this up next by talking about Anthony Knapp. Because I think a lot of this is there's a lot of ways to look at Anthony Knapp, Trev. Some are positive, some are negative. But he is the guy that I believe his presence right now is creating as much division, debate, argumentation in the Notre Dame fan base as really anything outside of the quarterback battle. And as with all these debates, what tends to happen is we tend to go to extremes. The people that defend Anthony Knapp are trying to turn him into the next Joe Alt. The people crushing Anthony Knapp are going to act like the kid's never had a meaningful, positive snap in his life. And the only reason that there's any way that Anthony Knapp is going to start this year is favoritism from Joe Rudolph. That's the other side of that narrative. And I don't know that either of those things are true. And I think we should have an honest conversation about Anthony Knapp here, Trev, before we can wrap up this kind of conversation. And here's the reality of it. Anthony Knapp's freshman season was a bit of an enigma. And we can say two things are very true. And I'm going to say these, Trev. This is what I believe to be very true. And I want you to give me your honest opinion of whether or not you believe this to be true. The first thing that I will say that is absolutely true is for chunks of last season, Anthony Knapp was a liability in pass pro. Like a major liability in pass pro. To the point where I understand why some people are saying this kid just flat out should not be playing left tackle this year. That's one thing that I believe to be true. Here's the next thing that I believe to be true. For chunks of last season, Anthony Knapp was your most dominant run blocker. Not always your most assignment correct, but most dominant run blocker. I think those two things are both true. Agree or disagree with that statement about Anthony Knapp during his true freshman season?
No, I would agree with that. I would. And when you go and you break it down, I think the film supports that. And so, yeah, I would agree with that sentiment about Anthony Knapp.
What was the issue with Anthony Knapp in pass pro last year? Number one is he was young and very inexperienced. Like he struggled for a chunk of the season in pass pro for different reasons at different times. At times it was lack of size. At times it was poor technique. At times it was, I don't think he knew who the heck he was supposed to block. Let's be honest about that. And at times he looked comfortable and played pretty well. I thought he was pretty good against USC. He was pretty solid against Georgia Tech. Thought he played pretty well that game. And that was surrounded by two games he didn't play very well. He was terrible against Stanford the week before the Georgia Tech game. That is the concern, I think, that a valid concern a lot of people have. Is, can Anthony Knapp get better? Of course he can. Will he get better? Of course he will. But how much better in pass protection? Will he get to justify him being the left tackle? I think that's really the big question that a lot of people have, Trevor. But it's the thing that needs to stop being talked about is that Anthony Knapp lacks length to play tackle. That's false. Anthony Knapp's issues are not a lack of length at tackle. I question the girth. I question and I question, is he comfortable there? Like, and then the final question, well, actually, I'll get to the final question here in a bit, Trev. But the length thing is important because that can't get fixed. The best thing you can do about that is to just be a great technician. Here's the thing. Anthony Knapp, I promise you, is longer than Zach Martin. Anthony Knapp also weighs about the same amount as Zach Martin did as a true freshman at Notre Dame. Do you know how many sacks Zach Martin gave up as a true freshman at Notre Dame, Trevor? Do you remember how many that was? The answer is 0. Do you know why he gave up no sacks as a true freshman at Notre Dame? Because he didn't play a snap as a true freshman at Notre Dame. How do we know he wouldn't have struggled like crazy in 2009 as a true freshman at Notre Dame? We don't know the answer to that. How do we know that Gerby Lambert, if he was thrust into that starting left tackle job, wouldn't have given up even more pressures and sacks than Anthony Knapp gave up? We don't know the answer to that. So you can evaluate his performance as substandard in pass pro, and it was. You can question, how much better can he get? and that's very true. But the reality is the coaches know his strengths and weaknesses so far. The other reality, too, is he was a true freshman that will likely get better. So my thing that I've seen with Anthony Knapp is we've got to the point where there's so much hyperbole about his performance that it's almost hard to have an honest conversation about it, but we're going to still try our best. And I said earlier, I don't know if I said this during the show or if I said this to you when we were talking, but I've seen this statement get made on their message board. If Anthony Knapp starts at left tackle, Notre Dame's going to go 8-4 next year. I've seen that statement get made. And while I understand what's behind it, I think that's an incredibly hyperbolic, just misguided statement. And take the hyperbole of the record out of it. The concern is Anthony Knapp's struggles last year were somewhat masked by how good Riley Leonard was at avoiding pressure. Can the new starters at quarterback do that? That's the question. And that's a very valid concern because Anthony Knapp can't just be slightly better in pass pro this year than he was last year. Because slightly better in pass pro is going to result in a lot more sacks than you gave up last year because you don't have Riley Leonard's escapability. Kenny Minchie's not that quarterback. CJ Carr's not that quarterback. And Steve Angeli's not that quarterback. The only guy at quarterback only guy on your roster that might have that kind of escapability, wears number 26 now, and he plays wide receiver. That's Tyler Buckner. That's it. So the demand, he's going to have to play a lot better in pass pro in his second year. And that's where the concern is for me, Trev, is he capable of making that big of a jump? And the answer is going to be determined by what were his real concerns last year. Is he not comfortable at left tackle, or did he not look comfortable at left tackle because he didn't have the necessary experience with technique and the speed of opposing offensive linemen that made it look like he's just not comfortable in space? The answer to that question, in my opinion, is going to go a very long way towards determining whether or not Anthony Knapp is capable of thriving at left tackle next season in a way that far exceeds what he did this past season.
When I think about a guy like Anthony Knapp, I think two things can be true. Yes, pass protection absolutely needs a bump. And I do think that there is some truth to the conversation around, I think Riley Leonard helped out not just Anthony Knapp, but the rest of the offensive line. Now,
right.
With that being said, no.
Wasn't like they had 4 Joe Waltz everywhere else, and then Anthony Knapp out here ruining it for everybody. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it definitely wasn't that.
Oh yeah, I mean, you could look, man. You could make the argument that tackle play in general at Notre Dame needs to step up. I love some of the things that I saw from Emil Wagner, but what I do have to go off of are the numbers. You know, if you go per Pro Football Focus, you go and you look at what the pressure numbers were over the course of the season for Notre Dame. The 2 tackles were in the lead by a lot. Anthony Knapp led the team with 31 pressures allowed. Next in line was Emil Wagner with 29. The next was Rocco Spindler with 10. Now,
right.
Nature of the beast, you're just going to get more pressure on the edge than you will allow it a guard. Like, that's just kind of some of the nature of the position. But those numbers are shocking. You know, like when you go and you think about it.
Unless you're a team that's got a first and a second round draft pick at tackle like they had the year before, where Joe Alt gave up 5 pressures and Blake Fisher only gave up 15.
Yeah.
And then the year before, Pat Coogan led the team in pressures, and Rocco was tied for second, but he played 2 fewer games than Blake played.
Mm-hmm. I will say this, and yes, I think Riley Leonard got them out of a lot of pressures. I do firmly believe that. Where I think the caveat is going to be is along similar lines of conversations that we've had in the offseason as well. Yes, Riley Leonard got them out of pressures. Some of the reasons why he was pressured also last season is because he just wouldn't throw the ball. Like we talk about the missed opportunities in the pass game.
Or he
single
would slide
pressure,
the protection the wrong way.
Yeah.
There was that at times as well,
like,
early in the season. Right.
I will say every single pressure that the offensive line gave up last year, Anthony Knapp included, wasn't every single one of Anthony Knapp's 31 pressures were all on quick game. And Riley Leonard had to do some circus act, heroics, Houdini stuff in the backfield to evade it. Like that's not reality. But what is reality is some of them were. Some of them were on quick game. I think of the Louisville game. Well, Riley Leonard couldn't even reach the top of his drop before somebody got forklifted into his lap.
And that wasn't always Knapp. I can think of the one three-man pressure that came right in between Rocco and Emil Wagner and hit him on a three-step drop. We had a wide-open receiver, but the ball floats in the air because as a quarterback, you don't ever anticipate getting hit on three-step drop when you catch, plant, and throw.
Right.
Like, now you're taught in hey, if you can't get rid of the ball in time, you better start looking for pressure because we're not protecting the edges this way and we're not doing that. You never expect to get hit when you catch, plant, and start to throw. And that happened to Riley at times last year. But it wasn't always Anthony Knapp. And that's a concern I have also for Joe Rudolph is you better fix that.
Yep. But that's just kind of I do believe when you're having an honest conversation around Anthony Knapp, I'm a firm believer that a lot of fans, when they put themselves into camps, a lot of people end up being the scapegoat. Well, what's the easiest scapegoat for Notre Dame's offensive line in 2024? The 6'4", 290-pound true freshman that started.
Who only started because somebody else got hurt.
Yes. That is, if you're going to look up the definition of the scapegoat, it's not going to be the veterans of Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler, despite the fact that some of their performances were not stellar either. They didn't come in and start for 13 games and were Quentin Nelson and Nick Martin for those 13 games. That's reality. That's what it is. Emil Wagner was the only offensive lineman that started all 16 games. He wasn't Ronnie Stanley, So again, that feeds into the conversation of the offensive line play has to be better. But with Anthony Knapp specifically, I think it is realistic and an honest conversation to say that I don't think that he's played his best football in South Bend. And I also think he was their biggest liability in pass protection last year. I think those are two healthy conversations to have. And both of that, all of that feeds into what Brian brought up. Is he comfortable playing left tackle? Who knows? Is there somebody else more comfortable at playing left tackle than what Anthony Knapp is? Don't know, based on all the shuffling that's been going around. And again, all feeds back into the questions that we've been covering for the last hour and 40 minutes and some change. Who knows? But I don't believe, and I say this confidently, I'm with Brian. I haven't changed my tune. If you were to ask me outside of the show, even in this show, if you're like, hey, do you think Anthony Knapp right now is the best option at left tackle for Notre Dame? My answer is no, because I still believe that he projects inside. But I'm also willing to say that I don't think that he's played his best football at Notre Dame either. I think that's also a fair and healthy conversation to have. And so now it's just, where can Joe Rudolph plug him in to give him the best ability to play his best football in South Bend? I am under the belief that it is not the blind side of a quarterback. Yes, I do believe that Anthony Knapp was a dominant run blocker. The thing that I look for in my left tackle is not being the best run blocker on the team. It helps. I would like him to be the best pass blocker on the team if I had a choice, which Anthony Knapp was not. That's the facts of the matter. Whether you like it or you don't like it, you can go and pull up the numbers. And who led the team last season in pressures allowed? It was your left tackle. And that has to get fixed. Whether that's Anthony Knapp taking a jump or somebody else inserting themselves in. But lo and behold, at the end of the day, pass protection has to get better across the board for Notre Dame, Anthony Knapp included. Yeah. And that's where I'm at with my conversation with him.
And that's what makes me think part of this improvement is on the shoulders of Joe Rudolph from a coaching standpoint. So we're throwing a lot of numbers at you. I want to put some context in this. So we'll use the Pro Football Focus numbers. So last year, Anthony Knapp gave up 31 pressures in 2 games on 451 pass sets, because that matters too. And then he had you look at his just kind of his overall success rate according to Pro Football Focus. His efficiency rate was 95.9. That's basically, you take the number of pressures you allowed and divide it by the number of, true pass sets. And then that's pretty much kind of how you get to how you get to that number. So I think it was the 425 number is actually the one that, no, hold on a second. So 31 divided by 425. No, let me see here. It's actually the 451. So, but yeah, so you look at that number, Trev, and you say, okay, what does a good number look like? We just look at past Notre Dame success. Ronnie Stanley, I don't have his 2013 numbers because Pro Football Focus wasn't a thing in 2013. They didn't start till 2014. But in 2014, Ronnie Stanley had a 98.4 efficiency. He gave up 17 total pressures on 564 pass block snaps. He gave up 0 sacks, 2 hits. In 2015, the year that he was an All-American, he actually gave up 3 sacks and 4 hits, but he only gave up 14 total pressures on 458 pass sets. He gave up an efficiency of 98.0. Mike McGlinchey, in his first year as a starter in 2015, allowed 17 pressures, no sacks, only 2 hits. The next year, he was 17 pressures, 2 hits, 2 sacks when he moved to left tackle. 2017, he gave up 16 pressures, 3 sacks, 2 hits on 463, 456, and 430 snaps. Efficiency rate of 98.1, 97.8, 97.7, all significantly higher than what we saw from Anthony Knapp and Emil Wagner last year, because Anthony was at 95.9, Emil was at 96.9, and his number took a big drop when they got to the postseason. Liam Eichenberg in his first year as a starter was at 97.4. He had some struggles his first year, gave up 23 pressures on 519 pass sets. This past year, Anthony Knapp gave up 31 on 451. So that's 8 more pressures than Liam Eichenberg gave up in his first year as a starter on 519 snaps compared to just 451 for Anthony. But let's keep in mind that when Liam Eichenberg took over, he was a redshirt sophomore that season where he had his struggles. The next year, Liam got a lot better. He only gave up 12 pressures on 496 snaps, 8.7%. And then in 2020, when he was an All-American, he gave up 0 sacks, only 1 hit on the quarterback. He gave up 3 sacks as a first year as a starter. Liam Eichenberg didn't give up another sack. The next 2 years, only gave up 4 total hits. That's why I say Ronnie Stanley was the better pro prospect. He was more dominant at times. Liam Eichenberg was a far more effective player than Ronnie Stanley was in pass pro, because Ronnie was so flashy, but Ronnie was an elite talent, which is why we saw him when he got to the NFL. His best days were kind of ahead of him, and that proved to be true. But Liam was a very, very steady player. 98.7, 98.2 efficiency rate his last 2 years. Robert Hainsey, in his career, 4-year starter, gave up 17, 12, 8, and 17 sacks. Robert Hainsey is a true freshman. Gave up 17 pressures compared to Anthony Knapp's 31. Seems bad, right? Robert Hainsey only had 251 pass block snaps that year. His rate, his efficiency rate on a Joe Moore Award-winning offensive line at right tackle was 95.6 as a true freshman. What were the knocks on Robert Hainsey? Not very big. He was like 290, 292. At times, I can assure you this, I know the family well. He was under 290 at times in 2017 and 2018. But he was smart. He was a pretty good athlete. He wasn't as long as Anthony Knapp. He was a tough kid like Anthony Knapp. But the Robert Hainsey example I like a lot. The next year, 2018, is a true sophomore. Robert Hainsey, who gave up 17 pressures on 251 pass block snaps as a true freshman, the next season on 510 pass block snaps, gave up 12 pressures and went from 95.6 effective efficiency to 98.7. And then his last year as a starter on 462 snaps, he had a 97.8 efficiency, gave up 17 pressures, but only 2 were sacks and 2 were hits on the quarterback. That's one that relates, I think, very closely to what we saw this past season from Anthony Knapp, because he's the only one that played as a true freshman. So, and then obviously we saw Joe Alt make a big jump too. Joe Alt went from 97.8 to 99.0. This is a pretty good sized jump for a guy, he gave up 4 pressures in 330 pass snaps as a freshman. He gave up only 8 pressures in 406 snaps as a sophomore. I'm not saying Anthony Knapp is Joe Alt. I'm just giving you some context on what the other great offensive linemen have done. So here's my thing on Anthony Knapp. He can get better, But it's not just because Liam Eichenberg did and Robert Hainsey did doesn't mean he will. And that's the thing he has to go show, is that he can get better. But what I've said to you guys before is I don't think Anthony Knapp's issues are a lack of a talent. I think he's strong. I think he's got really good length. I thought he was long coming to high school, but I thought he was like interior long. I didn't realize he was as long as he actually is. Like when I heard his measurements when he reported Notre Dame, I was surprised by them that they were as good as they were. Just being honest with you, length is not an issue for me. Athleticism is not an issue for me. He's more athletic than Robert Hainsey was. He's a very strong player. I was told this when in fall camp. I was told this by someone on the staff, that he was one of their strongest offensive linemen as a freshman, like in the weight room. He's a very strong kid. And so like Brent Byers made a comment about he thinks he's going to struggle with speed. And I said, I can understand why Brent feels that way. I totally do. Because there were times he just got ran by. My question is, I don't think that's a lack of athleticism. I think that's a lack of two things. Number one is proper technique. And then number two is some people just aren't comfortable playing in space. And that's what I'm referring to. They're not comfortable playing the angles. Like playing left tackle is not just about, are you athletic enough to get out of your stance and get to a guy? Are you athletic enough to plant and redirect in another directions? Are you comfortable doing so? I've seen some guys that are really athletic in the basketball court get juked all the time because they just don't have a feel for playing defense in space. That's why some guys are like every great man defender in basketball isn't a guy who's an elite athlete, and every elite athlete's not a great elite, great on-ball man defender. Some guys just don't have the instincts for it. Every elite athlete is not a great man covered player, and every average athlete's not bad at man coverage. There's a level of field to it. And so if you don't have a feel for how to handle counter moves and double moves and twists and stunts, that's my bigger concern for Anthony Knapp. Now, the question is that he just doesn't have the instincts for it or the feel for it, or is it because he was a freshman? There's times, Trev, you'd watch on film. You know what my issue is? It's not that Anthony Knapp is he athletic enough to just kick, slide, and get to an edge? I know he is when his technique is right. My question is once he starts handling that with ease, how does he handle the counter moves? There were times last year where there would be a twist in his direction. He just flat out wouldn't see it way too often. That tells me he doesn't necessarily have a great feel in space. That's where my concern comes from. And then at times he would get tossed, just physically tossed. That I don't worry as much about because that happened to Robert Hainsey a couple times as a freshman, and it didn't happen to him a whole lot after that. Because there's also an adjustment of getting used to the size and speed. And then my question is we didn't see him get tossed a lot later in the year. And if you look at his performance, he still gave up a lot of pressures in the second half of the year. Gave up 3 to Florida State, 3 to Virginia, 6 to Indiana, 3 to Georgia. But what changed, if you look at the Pro Football Focus numbers, all 4 of the sacks he allowed and 2 of the 3 hits on the quarterback he allowed all came from the beginning of the year to Stanford. From Georgia Tech on, he didn't allow a single sack according to Pro Football Focus, and he only allowed 1 hit on the quarterback. Now, I think those numbers are flawed. I can point to a couple times where he gave up some hits on the quarterback, and there's a couple times he was about to give up a hit on the quarterback, but Riley spun out or did something to just avoid the guy, and then it doesn't count as a sack or a hit. It just counts as a pressure. And so those are things he's going to have to get better on, but there was some level of improvement of just the run bys in the second half of the year. So that's my bigger concern with Anthony Knapp. And for me, that's the thing he's going to have to answer for me to feel better is that he shows more awareness in space. He shows more awareness of what's happening around him. He's obviously got to improve technically, but that's true for all freshmen. But I don't know that he's comfortable playing tackle. Now, is that because he was just a freshman? Or is that because he's just one of those people that's not comfortable out there? That's the biggest question for me for Anthony Knapp this next season. And his ability to answer that question is going to go a long way towards telling me if this kid's good enough to play tackle at Notre Dame or not. And that's what we're going to find out. And if he is good enough to play there, then you say, okay, cool. I feel good about Anthony Knapp starting a left tackle. But you still go back to the question of, but he should only start there not because he's getting the job done, but because he's the best guy for the job. And that's always going to be a question mark for me. Final piece for me, Trev, before we go. My big issue with them just putting him in at left tackle and not allowing real competition, if that's how it goes, and I don't know that it's going to go that way, but I'll tell you why my concern is. At the end of the day, the biggest issue I have with forcing him in at left tackle, if that's the route you go, is I still don't think that's his best position. I don't think that's what's best for him. The Notre Dame staff, primarily Joe Rudolph, needs to come to grips with the reality of Anthony Knapp at left tackle that they came to grips with on Charles Jagasaw at guard. There's been a lot of people that were convinced Charles Jagasaw could be an elite guard. The issue I had with those people is they would then try to convince themselves that he also couldn't play tackle at a pretty high level. That was my problem. I think Charles Jagasaw could be a pretty good left tackle and a pretty good right guard or left guard or right tackle. I think Charles Jagasaw can be pretty good anywhere but center. But they felt, but he's really special at guard. And so when you look at it from a Jagasaw standpoint, not only are you going to put him in a position where you think you can get his best game, but you're also putting him in a position where he can have the best projection to the next level. My issue with Anthony Knapp not playing center is not only do I think you have better options at tackle, maybe not right this second, but if you work with them enough, they will. The other issue I have is I still think this kid could be a special center because of his athleticism, his power, his length, his toughness, and all the traits that I think can be masked with him being in a tighter area because I don't think he's comfortable in space. That, at the end of the day, is ultimately my biggest problem with force-feeding him at tackle. It's not even just that I think Gerby Lambert's better than him, which I do believe. It's that I think you're not putting him in position to maximize his potential either. Because if you put him in at center, whether it's this year if he beats out Ashton Craig or it's next year, whenever, and you have him and Charles Jagasaw playing side by side as the center guard combo, that's going to be a pretty nasty run blocking combination. And then, and so that's something to consider too. And my final piece is if you are going to leave him a tackle, then I think you need to consider moving Charles Jagasaw to left guard. Because at the end of the day, I still want my two best blockers, run blockers, side by side. And I think your two best run blockers next year are likely going to be Jagasaw and Knapp. Whether that's guard center, guard tackle, whatever, that's something to consider. The other option is you want your two best guys on opposite sides because then they lay both sides. And that's fair. That's fine. I have no problem with that. My personal preference is I want my two best guys side by side. Not something I would necessarily criticize the coach for unless just something's not working. But, I mean, if you take Billy Schrauth and put him next to Anthony Knapp, that's still going to be a pretty nasty run blocking duo. You know what I mean? And we saw it against Penn State. They started running the ball pretty well to the right side with Emil and Charles. So that's more of a personal preference, not this is how you maximize your ability. But they just, at the end of the day, they need to make sure that they're putting their players in the positions where they're suited best. That also gives them the best chance to have a starting five. I don't know if they're going to do that. If they don't do that, it's going to limit the effectiveness of the line. If Joe Rudolph is willing to do that or able to do that or recognizes that, I think this offensive line has a chance to be not only really good, I think it has a chance to be elite now. If he can find the right blend of five, this offensive line can be elite. And I think that's where the pressure is on Joe Rudolph. There's going to be no excuses. There's way too much talent in that room for you not to put one of the five best offensive lines in the country, at least by the time we get to October and November. They may not look great in September because of everybody being out and some different things. And we've seen years under Harry Hiestand where they had guys miss a lot in the spring, and it kind of took them a couple games to kind of get their feet wet because there were so many moving pieces. We saw that a little bit, with some of his offensive lines in different years. But once they got rolling, they were pretty flipping good. I mean, we even saw that in 2022 as the last offensive line, where they weren't great in September. They struggled against Cal. They struggled against Marshall. They struggled against Ohio State. But by the end of the year, that offensive line was pretty flipping good. It takes time for that line to come together. So they just need to be good enough against Miami and A&M. But the real test is by the time you get to October, get to November into the playoffs, that's when that unit should be hitting their mark. And if they can get there, it's a line capable of leading this offense to elite things. if he makes mistakes and doesn't put the right people, and he can improve the technical aspects of pass blocking across the board, then that's going to continue to be a limiting factor in Notre Dame reaching their full potential as an offense. It'll even be more limiting next year because your offense will be more oriented on throwing the football than it was this year. And that's where the offensive line's got to perform well.
I'm with you. The offensive line is it's an area that needs to step up. And it's honestly my biggest pause across the board, despite there being a quarterback competition going on right now when you talk about the ceiling of this football team. It really is, Brian, but I'm absolutely with you. Well, listen, folks, that's going to do it for the offensive line portion of this show. Really good discussion today. A lot of things to keep our eye on moving forward as the spring progresses. But don't go anywhere because we do have a mailbag coming up. But before we get there, folks, please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. And as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. A lot of the conversations that we're currently having right now, and I'm sure some of the ones that we're going to have after this mailbag, are currently ongoing right now in the Champions Lounge at the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, it's mailbag time. And in case there are any new listeners in there today, the way a mailbag works is if you've had a question or a comment that's come up over the duration of the show, or if you've had one throughout the week that you want to get answered, go ahead and put a little MB next to it for mailbag, or a little mailbox emoji to know that basically tells Brian and I, hey, set this comment aside and we'll get to it. If you want your question or comment bumped up to the top, we'd always appreciate a super chat. That'll get your question answered right away. We're going to go for about an hour or until we get all the questions answered. And then friendly reminder, we do have a Friday free-for-all mailbag tomorrow. So if for whatever reason we don't get to your question today, keep it in the back pocket, throw it in early in the chat tomorrow, and we'll make sure that it gets answered. Whether it's today or tomorrow, your question or comment will get answered. But, Brian, I'm ready to kick off this mailbag, man.
Let's do it. Josh Buffo, the motivational business banker, got in with a major mailbag explosion here. So we'll start off with a couple of his, and then we'll keep rolling through some other people. Salty put his typical, list a bunch of questions. So we'll get to those too. We appreciate all those. So let's get started here with Josh.
In your opinion, how big is it to have a roster full of players that do not have the can't win a big game stigma that previous year players have had under Brian Kelly? Also, how big is that for recruiting?
Every roster is that loses a bunch of games is going to have that stigma, and it doesn't require them all to be gone before that gets removed, because that stigma was there in 2015 for Clemson. There still was that accusation that they couldn't win the big games. They still struggle with Florida State and South Carolina. They weren't that far removed. I mean, there was an expression going into 2015. It was called Clemsoning. That was a real thing in 2015. What changed? It's not that they had to just remake the roster. It's that there was a leadership group and a talent base and a coaching staff that said, hey, we're not going to be that anymore. We're going to move past that. And when you look at this past season, there was a lot of players on this Notre Dame football team that were still kind of tainted from that can't win the big game thing that existed under Brian Kelly, because that can't win the big game continued early under Marcus Freeman. Lost to Ohio State in 2022 and 2023. Got whooped by Clemson last year. Went on the road and got embarrassed by Louisville. All big games, all big moments, I should say. I mean, the least quote-unquote big game of that group was the Clemson game because they were unranked. You beat Duke on the road, barely. I mean, you almost lost that one as well. So there was this notion that Notre Dame couldn't win the big game. That continued. And this past year's team had a lot of new faces, but there were still a lot of those guys on the team that played a big role on this team. And you look at like a Riley Mills and some of those, Xavier Watts and some of their best players were from the teams that, quote unquote, couldn't win the big game. It comes down to leadership, change in attitude, getting in some players who have that dog mentality. That's really what changed. You get a guy like a Riley Leonard who just kind of has that dude, we're going to go out here and we're going to give you everything we got. You recruit players like Jeremiah Love, who weren't part of sort of that previous era, that have that bring on anybody, any place, anywhere, anytime mentality. So it's part recruiting new players to that, and it's part just changing the mindset and the attitude of those players. And the other part of it too is you finally got to win one. And I think that's what made that Texas A&M game so important, because the hype on that game, it was a huge game. Now, I don't care what Texas A&M turned out to be, a good football team, not a great football team. Record was close to what I thought it would be, although I thought they'd be better in November than they were, to be honest with you. I thought they'd finish better. I didn't think their fade would come late. I thought late they'd be a much tougher team. Didn't turn out to be the case. But it doesn't change the magnitude of what that game meant for the Notre Dame players. And the way they went about their business that game showed me that mindset of, kind of clinching up a little bit in big games, right, was gone. And once you got that big win, it's like that was kind of, okay, we're past it. We're not that team anymore. And I think it's important to have that. It's very important to have that. I just don't think you need to purge your roster to get there. And then how big is it for recruiting? It's huge. I mean, you're battling against Georgia for top players. You're battling against Penn State for top players. This is the best time at Notre Dame has ever had for going against those guys, because now you can point to them and say, hey, if you're Al Washington and you're recruiting a big-time defensive lineman who's also looking at Georgia, you can't point to NFL success per se, although Notre Dame's doing some things with that. But you can say, hey, man, you got to come here and help us start this legacy, because you can come here and play for a championship. Look what we just did, and look who we beat to get there. Whose defensive line played better in that game, ours or theirs? The answer is very obvious. It was Notre Dame's. Now, Georgia still beat Notre Dame's offensive line up, but Notre Dame's defensive line was more dominant in that game and made more big plays in that game than did the Georgia defensive line. It's a great time to kind of have that debate. And if you're recruiting a DB, well, whose DB stepped up in the second half and made all the plays, and whose DBs got beat in the fourth quarter and fell down and choked in the fourth quarter? Theirs are ours. Right? So, I mean, it's a great time to kind of be in that situation. That stuff is huge for recruiting, because you can say all you want about, hey, we're playing for championships here, but if you're not, then it's hard. It's a hard sell. I've used this example before, Trev. Recruiting a kid and showing him that you have done something is way different than saying you want to do something. A perfect example. I was talking to Alize Mack during his recruitment about what was the thing that kind of turned the corner for Notre Dame. And he said, look, he said, was it Alize or was it somebody telling me about what Alize told him? I don't remember what it was, but it basically was, because I said it was Alize, I think it was actually a conversation I'm relaying that Alize told somebody else. So I want to make sure I'm clear on that. But what he said is the difference in the recruitment was when he went to Notre Dame, when he went to UCLA, the coach got on the board and he drew up all the different ways on the board how they were going to use Alize. He said that mattered to him. They had a plan. He said, but we went to Notre Dame, they popped in the film of Tyler Eifert doing all the things that they were going to ask Alize to do. And he said, that's what the final deal was for me. Is this school had a plan, but this school had already done it. They already knew how to do it. I knew they knew how to do it. And that was the final straw. That matters to players. We talked about this with Keon Keeley. Notre Dame can talk till they're blue in the face about what they can or can't do with five-star players. Alabama can just say, well, here's what we've done. We've already done. So that's huge, Josh. Absolutely huge for Notre Dame to get to that point in time.
The one thing that I will say, too, is, yes, it helps to have a roster full of players, but I think now the person in charge and leading the program is the right guy. Throughout Brian Kelly's tenure, you always heard it's like, these are the games why you come to Notre Dame. It's like, yeah, look, man, you can say that if you win them. You can't say that if you get boat raced in all of them. Yeah, you beat Clemson in 2020 when they had their backup quarterback and 6 other starters out due to COVID, and it took you double overtime to do it. Then you played that same team later on in the conference championship, and you got worked. But now I think it's different because you now have a head coach that embodies this is why you come to Notre Dame to play these games, which I think is one of the reasons why there's been those random surprised upsets. Because let's call it spade, you don't come to Notre Dame to play Marshall. You don't come to
Right.
Notre Dame to play Northern Illinois. You come to Notre Dame to
That's
play
been part
Texas
of
A&M.
his learning experience as a
Yes.
coach.
Yes. And I think
Brian
that's
Kelly was always confident in those games.
Yeah, sure was. Yeah.
But I love what you're saying, Trev, because my focus is on the roster, and your focus is also great because you're talking about you need the leadership from a coaching standpoint that's going to get you ready for that game. I've talked to players from the 2017 team, and I talked to coaches from the 2017 team, and they'd be like, "Man, the head coach was so tight that whole week leading up to Miami, easily irritable, just constantly, like even more so, more aggressive than normal, getting after people." The bus ride, everything was it was all tight. You could cut the tension with a knife. And he's like, and that was not how we had been all year. We were a loose team. We went out, we balled, we played, we did this, we did that. Like after Georgia game, we just went out and just with swagger and confidence. And then that game had that team a little bit shook. And then when they start throwing stuff at the bus and start rocking the bus and doing all this kind of stuff, a team that's already kind of puckered quite a bit and clinching their you-know-what, that's just going to be the thing that sends them into that game just unprepared to play. And that's exactly what happened. Could you imagine if somebody tried that with Marcus Freeman's team? Right. So the point you made, a couple people in the chat made, coaching has a big role in that too. And that's what I say. It's not about purging the roster. It's about recruiting the right kind of players and about changing the mindset of the players. Who's responsible for that?
Yeah.
Head coach on down.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that we focus a lot on Marcus Freeman for very good reason. I mean, just go watch him before the A&M game. You don't think that was sort of like a Lou Holtz save Jimmy Johnson's you-know-what for me moment? Yes, it was. But it's not just about him. It's also Monday to Friday. There's also a defensive coordinator who's really smart, but there's also an offensive coordinator that has a bit of an FU mentality. And that matters too. It's not just one guy. You had a running backs coach that's got a lot of swagger and a lot of confidence in himself and his players. You have a D-backs coach who's that way as well. And all those things, it's not just Coach Freeman. He hired people that are like him mindset-wise. That's what a good coach is supposed to do. And so so it goes beyond that. And they're all parts of having a roster that believes every time they step on the field, they're going to win. Rodney Hopkins said, love the IB Nation. Brian and Trev, the rest of the team rock. Thank you. Go Irish. Thank you, Rodney. I really appreciate that as well, man. Very, very much.
Another question in here from Josh. Which would you rather have, consistent and steady with not much as athletic ability, or a young, athletic, inexperienced, rocket arm quarterback? Steve Angeli, CJ, and Kenny.
Well, I don't know that any of those guys fit into either of those categories. I don't know that I would call Steve Angeli a consistent quarterback. To be consistent, you have to have the ability to prove consistency, and I don't think Steve has had that opportunity. I also don't think that I would say that Steve lacks athletic ability. He's a pretty decent athlete. I would of those two options, there's things I'm missing. Is the inexperienced rocket arm quarterback able to read a defense? Does he have leadership ability? Is he a guy that with 2 or 3 games of experience will be able to handle setting protections and going through progressions and reads? Then give me that guy any day of the week. If he's not, then I'm still going to be more effective with the consistent steady guy who maybe isn't super talented. So it really comes down to your ability to execute the offense, Trevor. And I'm willing to take some early lumps with a smart, talented quarterback who lacks experience than I am with a rocket-armed, big, athletic, prototype NFL, this, that, and the third, but doesn't know how to read a defense. Will never be great at reading a defense. That's Joe Milton. Why was Hendon Hooker? There's nothing Hendon Hooker does better than Joe Milton, except maybe he's a little bit elusive as a runner. Nothing physically that Hendon Hooker does better than Joe Milton. But the minute they benched Hendon Hooker or Joe Milton to go put with Hendon Hooker, that offense exploded. Why? Because Hendon had it up here. He was smart. He could read a defense. He could get the ball where it needed to go. It's not that Hendon wasn't also talented. It's just he wasn't. I mean, I still see videos, people like, Joe Milton's a freak. Look at him throwing the ball 85 yards. Don't care. I didn't care that he can do it. And I didn't care that Kyle Bowler could throw a ball through the uprights from his knees at the 50-yard line. Was irrelevant to me because he couldn't read a defense. And he couldn't. Okay, here's what I want to see Kyle Bowler do. Drop back and hit a post route. That's asking a little too much. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care that he can throw the ball from his knees through the uprights. It's he's down. If his knee is down, he's down. He can't make that play in the NFL or college football. So it's about, can you run the offense? But in Notre Dame's case, the reason I'm so adamant about give CJ and Kenny the job, whoever wins in between those two, is because both of them were praised for their football IQ coming into college. They just need the experience. Neither of them have that reputation of, but can he read a defense like maybe some of the other really young, talented quarterbacks that Notre Dame had in the past? You question if they can read a defense. You know, obviously that was one of the knocks on Phil Dracovic was, could he run the offense and read a defense, things like that. You know, is that true or not? Sometimes that was true when he went to BC. Sometimes it wasn't. But those kids, I don't think that's an issue. I just think they need more experience doing it. So in Notre Dame's case, give me one of the young, inexperienced, athletic, rocket-armed quarterbacks over the steady, consistent guy, because I think those young players, once the inexperienced part is removed, the rest of the stuff takes over.
I'm with that. Yeah, I agree. Aiden Benami, do you think it's true that staff members look at all/most recruits like replies and retweets on Twitter and social media?
I don't think the Notre Dame football coaches are doing that all the time. I think there's people in the staff, the administrate, like the back office staff that are doing that. Yes. I mean, you need to have some awareness of this. Like if this is a kid that's out there just tweeting just really dumb things and really inappropriate things, that's going to tell me a little bit about his character. And we're trying to bring in players that are going to represent our university the right way. One of the things that I love most about the Notre Dame football team is this is a group of young men that you're just like, they represent this institution, this program really well when they're out there doing other things. You know, I've talked about, I've had so many run-ins with different people around the community that talk about, hey, we had this player at our restaurant. We had this player here. I ran into this player here. Really nice kid, really polite. That stuff matters. That doesn't mean they can't get after it a little bit when they're out there having a good time with their friends, but it just means like they understand that you want to bring in a certain type of personality, certain type of character. And that doesn't mean that guy's soft or Manti is a very polite young man off the field, but you get him on the field, he was a monster. And so you definitely want to, because it may not mean you stop recruiting a kid, but it may mean you need to have a conversation with that kid and see how he kind of responds to some of the dumb stuff he's putting out there. But yeah, you'll do that, and you should do that. Because imagine if you take a kid, you go recruit a kid who's just got a history of a year or two ago before it became just recruiting some really horrible stuff, degrading to women or just some different things. You're just like, dude, that is not the kind of, if you don't know that, and then you get a commitment from him and then you find that out later, you look terrible. So yeah, I mean, I have done that. Before I had a conversation with Trevor, I went through his Twitter page. And it's like, is there anything here that I'm going to find problematic? Because that I've had people that's literally eliminated me from engaging with them about job opportunity. I've had a couple people that are like that. I'm like, dude, some of the stuff you tweet is just so outlandish that I want no part of that. It's not often, but it happens. So yeah, they do that. They absolutely do that.
Question from Werewolf. What are your thoughts on a late summer 5-day camp while cutting spring shorter?
I'm not a big fan of that, honestly. Look, you have summer workouts. You can do plenty of football stuff over the summer. I don't think that's necessary. And the reason that I still like the fall camp or spring practice being around 15 practices is I'd actually maybe add a few. Like if it was up to me, what I would love to see them do is say, hey, listen, you can have 10 to 12 full practices in the spring. And then you can have 5 to 6 practices. I'd go 6 because it's 3 a week give 6 practices either before spring or after spring. That's just in new enrollees and the current freshman class, meaning guys in their second semester. So like they were true freshmen the season before. And say you can do things with them. So you have 6 practices before, 6 practices after. Then what that does is that allows me to not have to force so many of those guys into reps during the spring. But it also gives me an opportunity, especially with how many kids are early enrollees. You could say, look, you can do 6 before, 6 after. You can do 3 before, 3 after. You can break up those 7. But in those 6 practices, you can do them right in the middle. I don't care. But you get 6 practices where only those players can be out there and performing and practicing. Then I would do something like that. That I think is because, yeah, I mean, most teams have dozen or more kids showing up that were not on the team beforehand. You'll have players who maybe couldn't play the year before. You get transfers. I would also put transfers into that category as well. It's like give them some time to work on things too. But that's what so I would actually extend spring a little bit in that regard, but you break it up a little bit. So that way there's no one group that's just getting completely worn out by 17, 18 practices. That's what I would like to see done. I think that as a coach would be far more beneficial to me than just kind of a random 5 practice period in the spring. Because the reason I say that is because once you get to around practice like 7, 8, 9, that's when it starts to click and you really can then start building on it in the final practices. 5 practices in the summer would be just enough to get us rolling, and then we got to stop again. So I kind of like the idea of right in the middle of the offseason. So you've got winter workouts for 3 months. Then you've got a good month and change of spring ball. And then you got another 3-month period that's the summer workouts before you get to fall camp. I think it breaks up real nice. You just got to use it properly. But I like having them together and then getting back to strength conditioning and those type of things. Because I don't need a bunch of football with pads on and practices sprinkled in every other month. So that's kind of how I would do it. I like the summer workout session. And then we've got 25 plus practices in fall camp to get them ready for the bang bang. That's the way I look at it. It's a fair question though, Werewolf. I mean, it's a good question. Just that's the reason I would go with it the way that I just said. So
question from Salty Virginia Peanuts. 2027 quarterback Trey Taylor commented that he did not have Notre Dame in his top 5 schools because he had not yet been offered. Will he add Notre Dame to that list if offered?
Yeah, he'll add him to his favorites list. I don't know that they'll get him. That was in a story that Sean Davis wrote for IrishBreakdown.com for those who haven't seen that. But, I mean, yeah, I thought his comment made a lot of sense, and I think it makes sense why a lot of other quarterbacks are going to say that. But I know he likes Notre Dame, but the longer you go on not offering these quarterbacks, the more you have a chance to maybe hurt yourself with them. But the thing I like is, as much as I dislike Notre Dame's strategy right now at quarterback, I appreciate that they've been honest with all these quarterbacks about and consistent. So they're not like offering 2 kids, but not everybody else. They're not offering any of them. I don't agree with the strategy. We'll see if it works out or not. It may work out, but I do like the fact that none of these kids have been like, they haven't told me what's going on. I don't know why I don't have enough. They all know. They all understand. And then they can choose to still visit or not. I do think it says a lot that they've got Trey Taylor, Peter Bork, Jamison Purcell, and Malachi Ziegler to all visit this spring on their own dime without an offer. I think that says a lot about the interest level that some of these quarterbacks have in Notre Dame. And so that's important, but you've got to build on that. You can still build a relationship without an offer as long as you're honest with each of these young men and you're consistent. And they have been. So and at the end of the day, and if a kid's not willing to come to Notre Dame because he didn't get offered in the timing he thought, well, that's okay. Maybe you weren't going to get that kid anyway. So I wouldn't do it that way. I don't agree with it, but it's also not like, you guys are dropping the ball. This is totally stupid. You're going to ruin I'm not there either. I'm kind of in between. I wouldn't do it. There's some risk there, but let's see how it plays out. So that's kind of where I'm at, Trev.
Fair enough. Another question in here from Josh Buffo. Is it a good thing or a bad thing or nothing at all that we have had such good luck with the transfer portal with our nickel position without getting a homegrown talent there?
I don't think it's. I think if anything, I wouldn't say it. I'd say it's a good thing that they've been able to go to the portal for the what they have. Uh, I think it's a bad thing that the depth chart was such that you didn't have the depth where you could maybe cross train a guy or move a guy to nickel because you needed all hands on deck at cornerback and safety. And what Mike Mickens has done in recent years is kind of help rebuild that. But even at cornerback, you're still in the process of rebuilding that a little bit because you've had some guys leave and Jaden Mickey left and Benjamin Morrison ended up maybe even being a little better than you thought. So he's a 3-year guy instead of a 4-year guy. So yeah, I think there's been some of that, but that the depth chart is getting to the point now where I don't think you have to go there. You've got Ben Minnick practicing there. I think Brandon Logan can play there. Some of the other corners have a shot. The Dallas Golden could play there. So I think it's good that while you're looking to build that position, and the other thing too about the nickel position, part of the issue too is it wasn't until Al Golden came along that really became a full-time position. It was always a cross-training position that a guy would play. Like Tariq Bracy started at field corner. He also started some in nickel. Like he played both. It wasn't really until Al Golden where it became like that's a starting job. And so, yeah, you're going to go to the portal to get that because it's kind of a new position and you're going to go get guys that have played that position with that responsibility. And it's going to take a while to kind of build that. Now it's like, okay, is Chris Ash going to keep that going in the same way? I don't know the answer to that. So we'll have to find out, but that's part of it too. But yeah, you always want to have homegrown talent, but there's also nothing wrong with going to the portal. And so far they're 2 for 2 and I think they're going to be 3 for 3 because I like the Devontae Smith pick, but love the Thomas Harper pickup. He was great. I thought the Jordan Clark pickup was a solid pickup. He was better than I thought he was going to be. And especially in coverage. And then I think Devontae Smith, I feel about Devontae Smith about like a lot like I did about Thomas Harper. Like this guy's going to be a good football player. If he can stay healthy, he's going to be a really good football player.
Yep, absolutely. I did like just Josh in the day and age of where college football is now. I don't think it's a good or bad thing, depending on if you have to fill an immediate need. It's a lot like the NFL draft and NFL free agency. You have to supplement your roster through both. And so, depending on the position, you got to do what you got to do. And as of right now, they're kind of batting 1,000 for their nickel position pickups. And I don't see Devontae Smith, the guy from Alabama, ending that streak. So, yeah, I think it's a good thing as of right now.
Yeah. We did have a super chat that I missed, and that is from CB922. Thank you very much for that, CB.
Thank you for the super chat. Not a football question, but is Florida playing with house money tonight because they already won the tournament? This means more.
I think it's the SEC tournament.
Oh gosh, no. So this is just my take on it. I don't think conference championships in basketball mean a whole lot when you're the number 1 seed in the dance. If I'm being honest, I don't know if when you go into a tournament you're playing with house money. I mean, the SEC as a conference is playing with house money because 7 of the 16 teams in the Sweet 16 are from the SEC, which is
you
crazy.
Put enough dang teams in from a league, they're bound to get some of those teams through to the Sweet 16.
Yep. Which is why I said the conference is playing with house money. But I don't think historically in college basketball, people hang their hats on. We might have lost in the Sweet 16 once you get to the moment that mattered as the number 1 seed, but at least we won our conference. That's my take on it.
Good stuff. All right, we had this question from Salty. Here we go.
Salty Virginia Peanuts, left guard position seems to have a reserved for Anthony Knapp sign on it. I think he meant left tackle. While Charles Jagasaw is working out at right guard. Is this the correct approach?
I think we talked about that during the main offensive line show, but I'm okay with that as long as I want to make sure that I'm clear on this. I'm perfectly fine with Charles Jagasaw being written in pen, Jagasaw guard. as long as you promise me that there's also going to be real competition at tackle, because I think this year there's enough talent at tackle with Emil Wagner, Anthony Knapp, Gerby Lambert, Styles Prescott, and Will Black to say if Anthony Knapp wins the job over all those guys, legitimately wins the job, then he's going to be fine. As long as it's a legitimate win, and then Jagasaw being a guard, you're going to get your best guys on there. I'm fine with that. As long as there's a real competition. Let's make sure I'm clear with that. And my thing is last year you needed Jagasaw at guard or a tackle. I mean, this year I would have here's what I said. I would personally play Jagasaw at left tackle in the spring, personally. But what I also said is, but if you feel a certain way about him, put him there and leave him there. And that's what they're doing. So I can't criticize them too much for that. I just didn't want them necessarily cross-training him a lot during the spring. Stick him somewhere and let him develop there. And, they felt – because I'll say this. If you leave Jagasaw at tackle, then you've made it much harder for Gerby Lambert to win a starting job. Maybe you can move him to guard, but I don't know that that's his best – could he play guard? Of course he could. But I don't think it's his best position. He's more of a tackle. So that's how I feel about that one.
Fair enough. Question from Brent Byers. If the 2026 class goes, say, 90% as good as it can, landing guys like Joey O'Brien, Dunham, Premer, etc., can this class be the best in the country, in your opinion? Not 247 rivals, or at least top 3 to 4 anyways.
Brent, I mean, I know that that's something that matters to you. We've talked about this before. I just don't care. I don't care. People say, well, the rankings matter because look at Bama and Ohio State. And I'm like, yes, but look at all the teams that rank similar to them who suck. Right? You can't pick and choose when rankings matter. I've said this before. The reason that Ohio State and Alabama have such a high success rate when it comes to winning with 4s and 5 stars is, as I pointed out, especially in recent years, because when those guys get committed to those schools, they get giant bumps in the ranking. Well, doesn't that prove that the ranking system works? No, because had they committed to Indiana or Vanderbilt or Kentucky, they would have still been very good players, but they wouldn't have got the rankings bump that they did. That's just the reality of the situation. And I've pointed this out time and time and time again, how those 3 schools especially get that favoritism. Clemson has not got that favoritism, which is why Clemson won so much without any top 5 classes. So I just don't care. I don't care. I really don't. So I don't care where the class is ranked as long as I like the class. I told you all about the 23 class. I told you all in 23 ended up ranking in 247's composite. I think it was like 10 or 11. And I told you guys then, I don't care what 247 Sports says. I don't care what Rival says. I don't care what On3 says. There are not 5 classes better than the 2023 class. There just aren't. I don't care what anybody says. That class finished 12th. USC's class finished 4 spots ahead of it. Miami's class finished 5 spots ahead of it. Oklahoma finished 6 spots ahead of it. LSU finished 7 spots ahead of it. None of those teams have had close to having the success that Notre Dame had the last couple of years. And you talk about a class that hasn't even had its full impact yet. And I tried to tell people then, that's an underrated class. There are not 5 classes in the country. Think about who was in that class. Jagasaw, J. Love, Minchie, Bubakar, Cooper Flanagan, Armel, Christian Gray, Drake Bowen, Ben Minnick, Sullivan Absher, Devin Houston, Jaden Alsbury, Joe Otting, Jaden Greathouse, Adon Schuler, Brennan Vernon, KK Smith, Chris Tarrick, and Preston Zinner. And that's only the guys that are still there. Rico Flores was part of that class. Braylon James was part of that class. Like, that was a big-time class. But why didn't it rank higher? Because a lot of those kids, when they committed to Notre Dame, saw their rankings drop. If Notre Dame got the same bump other schools got, like Jaden Alsbury, look at what his ranking was, and he committed to Notre Dame and what it ended up being. You know what I mean? Like, it's a joke. It's an absolute joke. And so I just don't care about that. What I'll tell you is this, though. What I will tell you is this, Brent. is if Notre Dame can land the players I think they're capable of landing, then so it's like I get what you're saying. This has a chance to be a top 5 to 7 class, in my opinion. I don't think the 26 class has enough juice on the board everywhere to be a top 2 to 3 class. I don't know if there's enough juice on the board at receiver, at D tackle, at linebacker. There's some guys that have a lot of upside, but they're a bit raw at corner, which you kind of have to do after the year you had at corner the last couple of years, to say it's a top 2 to 3 class. I definitely think it has a chance to be 5 to 7. That could change if maybe they can add a couple guys that I don't think they have a shot with right now. That could change a little bit. And when I say D tackle, I think the D tackle class has a chance to be pretty good. It has a chance to be a gap closing class. They get Tiki Hole and Elijah Golden, for example, or Mikhail Blade, or whoever you think can also play inside. That's a pretty darn good D tackle class, but it's not like an elite, like top 50 overall player type of pickup. It's like top 100-ish type of player. And that's kind of where I look at it, Brent, is there. I don't know that it's got enough juice on the board to be top 3. I think 27 does. I think 27's the class that has a chance to one where we look at and say it's got a chance to be 1 or 2. Like one of the best in the class, based on my opinion. So that's kind of where I'm at on that. So good stuff, Brent. And Brent, I wasn't ripping you, by the way. All right, let's go here.
Ronnie Reeves, does it concern you any that when Bo Collins was asked at the Combine who he saw as a breakout wide receiver, he did not mention Cam Williams?
I don't care about that. I also don't get excited when they talk about other players. Because, I mean, if you saw Cam Williams in the fall, you wouldn't have thought he was going to be a breakout player. You know what he's doing. Bo Collins didn't watch Cam Williams' high school film. He didn't watch him at the Army All-American game. I wouldn't have thought he was that player too. So I don't really care about that. That's not a knock on Bo Collins. I don't really care. It doesn't really matter. But I shouldn't say I don't care. It just doesn't affect me. I always like hearing those things. That's fine. Oh, yeah, it's just good to hear. That's cool. I'm glad to hear. Like, I like when I hear, like, Mitch Evans talk about CJ Carr or Kenny Minch. But it just doesn't affect me. Like, it doesn't affect my opinion of that player. So I shouldn't say I don't care about that one. It's just I enjoy hearing it, but it doesn't sway my opinion in any way. Nor does it raise a red flag for me. The only time it would raise a red flag is if I talk to a guy and he was like, that kid doesn't work.
Yeah.
That would be my concern, Trev.
I was going to say, like, the only thing that would concern me is if somebody asked him specifically about Cam Williams and he, like, declined to answer. But I'm with you. I mean, to be honest with you, I would even go as far to say it's like I kind of just don't care. Like, I'm not, if somebody gets mentioned or doesn't get mentioned, I'm not going to be like, all right, now they're going to go off because Bo Collins said so. That's how I look at it, if I'm just being completely honest.
Right. Some of y'all are really sensitive in the chat today.
Brent Byers, it seems the players have a voice inside the offensive line room. Do you think they would be content if Knapp ends up at left tackle? Basically, do you think that they think he is the best option?
That I don't know. I honestly don't have. I haven't had any conversations with anybody that would lead me to believe, or not lead me to believe, but lead me into having an opinion on what the room thinks about the other players. So I can't really answer that question. I've had I've had connections to people inside the room in the past. I don't really have a lot in the current room to where I'd have any way of giving an educated opinion or educated answer on that question. But I do think it matters that they do. Look, here's the thing, Brent, is it's like in a lot of sports, like if you're a point guard on a basketball team in a big moment, there's certain guys you are not passing the ball to because they have not earned your trust that they can catch the pass, that they can make the shot, that they can, you get into certain moments, I'm passing to him because he's earned that trust of mine. Same thing with a quarterback. I think you've said this, Trev. It's not a coincidence on the board. I think as my buddy Jeff, it's not a coincidence that in the Ohio State game was the most comfortable Riley Leonard looked at sitting in the pocket and not like second half against Penn State and against Ohio State is the most comfortable Riley Leonard looks sitting in the pocket and just not being worried about pressure. It could just be a coincidence that it was a different left tackle. I don't think it was. But that doesn't mean that he can't then earn that trust of the other quarterbacks now and in fall camp. Or if you're an offensive lineman and you don't trust that the guy next to me knows the call, knows the check, and he's going to work with me, that could create some issues. Hey, man, why'd you stick on that double team so long? Well, I wasn't sure if this guy was coming over. Man, you need to trust him to do his job and you do your job. Yeah, but I don't trust him to do my job because the last 3 times I left on time, he wasn't there and I got in, we got in trouble. So all those things matter. All those things matter. So having faith that a guy can do a certain job is very important. But I can't speak specifically about whether or not the Notre Dame players have faith in Anthony Knapp or not. I don't. And if you ask them at a press conference, they'd all say yes, but it's more about talking to sources, and I just don't have the kind of connections with that room at this point in time that I did before when I could kind of give you a sense of those things.
Another question in here from Josh Buffo. Do you feel like Jeremiah Love getting work at wide receiver has anything to do with making more room for Kedron Young or another young running back talent, or is it just expanding his athleticism to open the playbook?
It's the same thing they did last spring. Remember last spring when he was getting work at receiver and all the articles were about Jeremiah Love's playing wide receiver. No, he's not playing wide receiver. He's getting work in during drills with the wide receivers so he can have some opportunities to go out there and kind of expand his role. And we saw that early in the fall where he's running slot fades and running certain routes at a receiver. That's all it is. It's expanding his role and just finding, hey, what are some other ways we can get him on the field with another running back? But it's more so about his ability to impact the game in different ways is 90% of the reasons that you're doing that is that. The other 10% is we need to have him on the field, but we also need to find ways to have him on the field with this other guy who's really good, whether it's Jadarian or Aeneas or Kedron or whoever. Most of it's just about you want to get him some work so you can line him up out wide against certain matchups and take advantage of his athleticism and his skill and his talent in those roles. That's what it's about.
Aiden Benami, do wide receivers have a little say on quarterback? Obviously not much, if any, but if wide receivers prefer one quarterback, it's got to mean something.
No, not verbally. I don't think the receivers walk in there and have their like little, Rudy jersey moment. This is for so-and-so, coach. This is for that doesn't matter. Where receivers have a say, however, is how they perform with those quarterbacks. And it's not a direct say, it's an indirect say. Like, hey, I don't care who you think your guy is. Look, this guy may be your best friend and your roommate, but here's the deal. When you guys are on the field, you move the ball better with this guy. And that's who we're going to go with. So they have a say, like, man, some quarterbacks just don't throw catchable balls or for whatever reason. And it's gonna be impacted on how they work with the receivers. It's what's the connection the receivers have. Like, look, hey, I may love this guy and think he's this or that, but I just know with this guy, I get open, he's going to find me. And it doesn't matter what you say to the coach. It's going to be the fact that you got open and he found you it's going to matter. So, no, they don't really have a say, like verbal say in who's going to start. And if you're that unsure of who's going to start that you need to ask the players their opinion, then nobody really emerged and took hold of that job. But in how they perform, how they play, how they react to a player, how Like for example, I've said the players wanted, from everything I was told at the time, the players by and large wanted a different quarterback in 2016. Coaches still had to go with who they felt was the best guy. And then the consequences are what the consequences are. And we saw that in 2016. I don't think that's an issue with these three quarterbacks. There are different players who are going to think this is the guy, that's the guy, that's the guy. But at the end of the day, I think they're going to play for all of them. I think this is a very different situation. So in that regard, I do think that there is a little bit of a say.
Josh Bufo, if Madden lives up to the early spring hype, what packages would you like to see him in during the season? More of a KVA 2024 package or Jalen Sneed package?
Probably the Kingston role. Probably. I think he's more than just a pass. I don't know that I have seen anything from Madden Faramo in high school that makes me think he's like just a third down pass rusher. Like, I think he's an every down linebacker that can do a little bit of everything. And that's kind of what they did with KVA, Kingston, last year. So I'd say more of that role than anything else. That's kind of where I'm.
Yeah, I mean, I would say more of, out of any of those, I would say more of like a Jaden Osbury type package, just with less snaps. Like, I think if Madden Framo's going to rotate in, they're just going to have him play linebacker. I don't think it'll just be strictly third down rushing off the edge.
Agree.
Brent Byers, what is the optimal outcome for wide receiver recruiting this year? What is an A-plus class, both in your opinion and what you think the coach's opinion of it is?
I don't know that Notre Dame can land an A-plus class this year. I mean, an A-plus class is going to require like an elite top 50 type of guy. I don't know, a couple. Like, that's an A-plus class. I don't know that there's this staff is capable. I don't know that the board is such that they can get an A-plus class. I think if they were to get maybe an A minus is possible. But even then, like, I like the receiver board. I do. I don't know if it's one that I'm going to look at and say all questions about this have been answered because of this. But like, if Notre Dame goes out and they've already got Dylan Faison, let's say they get three more receivers. Let's say they go out and get Messiah Hampton, Mason James, and Caden Finley, or, one of those guys you don't get, and you get like a Braden Robinson, and basically you get three of those four guys. I'm going to be thrilled with that class. I mean, Messiah Hampton's a top 100 caliber player, borderline top 100 guy to me. Mason James is a top 100 guy to me. Caden Finley's a top 100 guy to me. Braden Robinson is not a top 100 guy because of his size, but he brings a skill set that is elite. And so even though he may be more of a potentially a niche guy in that role, as opposed to like an every down 75 catch guy and put up the kind of volume he does in high school, he may be a guy that only catches 25 passes for 25 yards of play and then has 10 carries on reverses and jets for, 15. And you're like, that's a dynamic play. He's not an every down guy. And I got to put in every. But you give me that group, three of those four guys with Dylan Faison, that's a heck of a group. That's a top 10 receiving class that gives me an A. But to have an A plus, I'd need one of those guys to be like a top 25, 30-ish caliber player on my board. And I don't have any of those guys there. That's where I am. And yes, I would take 4 in this class for a receiver, because they can hit the portal, but I don't want to. And I'd like to hit the portal for like a guy every year, not 2 to 3 guys every year. But yes, I would go with 4. I think that's where I would be.
Sure. Question from Jason Rose. Hey, guys, assuming that Jaden and Malachi do what's expected of them, if Notre Dame gets 2023 version of Will Pauling, how dangerous could this pass offense be?
I'm trying to think of. I don't know that there's a statistical number I can put on that, but I could say this: if they get that from the pass game, Jason, this offense is going to be a 40+ point per game team. Like, I'm confident saying that, and I think that it's an offense that you get into the postseason, and it can look like they can score 30+ on anybody. Because I think the quarterback receiver talent is very good. If the production matches the talent, like you're saying, we know the run game is going to be good. Like, if Joe Rudolph, we did if Joe Rudolph says, I don't care what anybody says, I'm going left to right, Knapp, Schrouth, Craig, Jagasol, and Wagner. That's it. I don't care what anybody says. That's my 5. You and I have some questions about pass pro. You and I would imagine, Trev, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm speaking for the two of us based on our conversation. I have zero concerns about that offensive line as a run blocking unit. Zero. That's still a really good run blocking offensive line. That's still a better run blocking offensive line than we saw last year because of all the injuries. And they averaged 200 yards a game and over 6 yards a carry and couldn't throw the football the way that you needed to throw the football to win a championship. So if that line has receivers that are going to produce like that, even if you give up more sacks than you should, you're still going to be really good. Now, is it going to be good enough to win a championship? That's going to then be determined by, can the offensive line protect the quarterback? Because that's how you negate talented receivers and a talented run game in the semifinals and the championship, is you keep sacking the quarterback in big moments. But that would make for a really dynamic. If Jaden and Malachi do what we expect them to do, and you get 2023 70 catches for over 100 yards, over 100 yards in a bowl game against LSU version of Will Pauling, plus Jordan Faison, plus maybe Cam Williams or Micah Gilbert, maybe KK Smith. I mean, are we just going to ignore Eli Raridan also here, Trev, you and I? You know, like, Jason, that's a dynamic offense. Dynamic offense.
It poses one of two questions for me. One of them is super awesome, and the other one is super not awesome, if I'm just being 100% honest. Looking at this from just a pure football standpoint, what we know about Notre Dame. 1, how many points a game are they putting up? 2, how many points a game are they allowing? If they have multiple 800-yard receivers and they're passing that much in games, how many points are they giving up? That is always going to be something that I think of when I think of just all out. I mean, with how much Notre Dame runs the ball, I hate to be the pessimist, but that is something that I see of it. If Malachi gets 800 to 1,000 and Jaden gets 700 to 900 and Will Pauling gets 800,
I don't look at it just from a pure volume standpoint, though. What I'm talking about is the level of play that Will showed in 2023.
Level of play, sure.
That may only look like it for 40 catches and 550 or 600 yards. So that's just kind of where I'm coming from on that. It's not so much that he's going to have 800 yards receiving, but I mean, look, you go, if you average 275 yards a game, how many, like, when you say those numbers, Trev, in your mind, what are you envisioning for the number of games? Are you talking about regular season or the 12+1? Or are you talking about like at the end of this, like a 15, 16 game season?
By the end of a 15 game season.
So let's go 15 games. That's 4,100 yards. So if Malachi and Jaden combined for 1,900 and Will Pauling has 800, that's still 1,400 yards that have to get dispersed, and that's only 275 a game. There's no reason Notre Dame can't pass for 275 a game and still run for 210, 215 yards a game too. You know what I mean? So I get you. See, this is, guys, you know what we're watching, folks? This is what we're watching right here, live TV. The first time we've seen evidence that Trevor still has a little bit of BKT PTSD in him, because he's looking at it and thinking, well, if we're passing like that, that means we're giving up 40 points a game.
Look, man.
First time, Trev, you've let it slip a little BK PTSD.
Just a little, man. I have, and like I said yesterday, I think Notre Dame's wide receiving core has the potential to be a top 10 in the league. But what is also a fact is Notre Dame has had one wide receiver in like 5 seasons end the year with over 600 yards.
Yeah.
And we're talking about like, yeah, Malachi's getting 800 and Jaden's getting 1,000. And it's just like, guys, I want to see somebody go over 600 in this season.
What's
Please.
wild is they used to do that every. They had from, let's see, 2010, 2011, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2019. Notre Dame had a 1,000-yard receiver in every season. And the only reason they didn't have a 1,000-yard receiver in 2016 is because they didn't play in a bowl game. Because Equanimeous had like 957 or something like that, right?
Yep.
So you had the 2012 season, you didn't have anybody sniff 1,000. The 2018 season, you had Miles was over 8, Chase was almost at 700, Fink was over 500. Alizé had 30 catches for 300. I mean, so like that team didn't have anybody, but you had a guy over 800. Like if you'd have told me, if you'd have expressed to me the concern you're expressing now after the 2019 season, I'm like, dude, you are being super negative. Notre Dame puts out a 1,000-yard receiver almost every year. Like, what are you talking about? But since then, to your point, Trev, they haven't really sniffed 1,000 yards, except you had Kevin Austin had over 800 in 2021.
Yeah.
But even that was a little bit of a puffed up 800 because he had a bunch in a bowl game where they threw the ball 68 times. But he didn't really play well in some of the bigger games.
And that Kevin Austin season was the last time a Notre Dame receiver finished the season with over 600 receiving yards, which is crazy.
A receiver, yes.
Receiver, yes. Tight ends, Michael Mayer eclipsed that.
Right.
But
right.
A true wide receiver.
Yeah. Yeah, and by the way, Kevin Austin had 888 yards, but he had over 100 yards in the last 2 games. He only had over 100 3 times that season. But yes, it was. This is not something we would have been talking about this way prior to 2020. Like, it's just wild how it just went off a cliff, man. Like, your pass game just went off a cliff. It. Very, very interesting how it happened. Yes, very interesting. I do think that's going to change for a host of reasons. Part of it is they don't have a tight end that's going to dominate the touches that way. Let's go to Insured by Big.
I'm curious why there is so much limited availability for media. Our media is always at practice, 11 of the 15. Why do you think Freeman wants it to be so limited?
I think coaches, by and large, don't really like having people around. I think a lot of that has to do with the athletic department as a whole and the communication team as a whole. I think there's Notre Dame as an institution is very much focused on trying to control the narrative, because your coach that allows 11 of the 15 was also the head coach at Notre Dame, where they didn't allow that much. Brian Kelly also allowed a lot more access to the team than Marcus Freeman has, for the most part. So, yeah, I mean, I think as you see changes at SID, changes in, different people are gone, and you're seeing less and less and less of that being allowed. I think a lot of it is just Notre Dame. Like, if there's an injured player, we can't talk about it until Marcus Freeman confirms it. Well, so I said, guys, we're not going to hear talk to Marcus Freeman until next Saturday. So what are we supposed to do for the next week and a half when everybody's wondering what's going on with a certain player? What are we supposed to do? Nothing. And then you get mad because there's rumors circulating around. Well, you didn't let anybody address it. You could have said, hey, look, here's what's going on, and here's why do I need to wait till Marcus Freeman confirms it? There's no HIPAA. I mean, it's very odd. But it's about Notre Dame just wanting to control the narrative is really what it comes down to. And I think that for a time there, Jack Swarbrick was really viewing the Notre Dame media becoming sort of its own entity of producing content. Now, they're not doing as much of that, producing their own content the way that I think they should. The stuff they put, here's the thing that frustrates me about the Fighting Irish media. When they put stuff out, it's excellent. They just don't put a lot out. And I think that's a disservice to fans because you do great stuff when you put stuff out. But they want to be the ones to kind of control. But now that they're not necessarily pursuing it from a content standpoint or making money standpoint, they still haven't upped the availability for us to be there. And I think that's part of my issue. What's so funny?
I had a sarcastic answer as to why LSU allows more media availability than Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman.
I gotta hear it.
Myself.
No, you can't keep it to yourself. You got to tell us.
I was going to say, because Notre Dame's head coach knows people like him and LSU's head coach knows people don't like him. So they want to do as much as they can to get on people's good side.
There's a lot of negativity around the program. So maybe that's a good point, Trev. That's not sarcasm. I think that's actually a pretty good. I mean, you may have meant it as sarcasm. I think that's a pretty good point.
Yeah.
Notre Dame doesn't need that media. Because, think about how many Notre Dame fans are making excuses for us not having a media availability. You think they would feel that same way if this team went 8-4? No.
That's my take on it. On top of what you think, but I just think that one of the coaches is universally liked and the other one is universally golfing.
Yeah. Real quick question from We Are Happily Independent, which I absolutely love, by the way. Did you make the scallops, Brian? And if so, did you enjoy them? I actually did make the scallops, and they were very good. So, yes, because my issue with scallops, Trevor, is if they're not cooked just right, I'd rather have a scallop a little bit overdone than underdone because I don't love the texture. Now, some people are exact opposite. They're okay if it's not fully cooked because they like that. I don't like that. I don't like that soft texture. So yeah. I did it. I found a couple different methods and they were very good. So I actually made them. I had steak one night. I had steak and mushrooms one night, and I made scallops, like 5 scallops kind of go on it on the side, and it was very, very yummy. So thank you for asking that question. Don't know that it's something I'm going to make a bunch. It was nice to kind of have, every now and then. And I like, Trev, I've talked about this. I like to cook and I like to experiment. So it's good to have it. Now I know that I have it in my back pocket if I ever want to make it. But my wife, it won't, because also Angie's allergic to scallops. Not like mushrooms. Like if she eats mushrooms, I got to take her to the hospital. If she has scallops, she just kind of, like if she has scallops or like lobster or crab, she just gets a little bit hivey, some hives break out. She eats mushrooms. It's like slam the epi into her pen and call 911, or slam the epi into her leg and call 911, or take her to the hospital. It's going to not be good. It's not quite that way with shellfish, but she can't eat shellfish and can't eat like clams and, either stuff like that. So that kind of sucks because she likes them. She wasn't that way when we first got married. We would go to, every time we go home to Virginia, we'd go to Captain George's and eat all you can eat seafood buffet. We have a picture from our first year of marriage. We went to visit my family of her holding crab legs and us eating there. So over time, she eventually kind of brought that on for some reason. Sucks.
Salty Virginia Peanuts. Assuming Mason James' upcoming visit exceeds all expectations, what is your gut instinct on whether he will commit Irish?
I mean, they'd have to really knock it out of the park. Really knock it out of the park. I mean, he's a kid that's from Norman, Oklahoma. Oklahoma wants him. He's been on that campus 12 to 15 times for visits. It's going to be tough to beat them for him. So possible, yeah. And now's the perfect time. You're coming off a national title, and they went 6-7, and their coach is on the hot seat. So now's like the perfect time to, maybe win that kind of battle. But it's going to be tough. But it's possible. I mean, I'd say I felt a little bit better about their odds with Javion Osborne coming into that visit, but it was similar, and they knocked that one out of the park. So it's hard to say that without the visit having gone on yet. But I think if they knock the visit out of the park, they put themselves in a position where they have a shot to close on them. But you're gonna need one heck of a visit. Like if they get Mason James, I don't want to hear jack about Mike Brown's recruiting for at least a month, because that would be a great pull. Not just as a upset over a in-state, not even in-state. It's an in-city school. I mean, it's not even an in-state program. He lives in Norman. But it'd be more about, like, Trev, I love Mason James film. Like, that kid is a dude, in my opinion. So that'd be a huge, huge pickup for me. Yeah. Huge pickup for me. Get a couple more here, Trev. And then we'll get out of here because we're a little over an hour, but I want to get just a couple more here. There's a couple more questions I wanted to get to. Just give me 1 second. I think there was one. All right, let's just go to, got that one. Here we go.
Question from Mark Avalone. Even Notre Dame being an O-line U with the portal, if a player like Jagasaw wants to be an NFL tackle that gets drafted earlier and paid more, wouldn't it be a bad move to stay if you were made a guard?
No, it wouldn't be a bad move. I mean, he may want to play tackle, but number one, it's not a given he won't move to tackle. Number two, if he was going to transfer, he'd have probably done that already. I don't know that this notion that Jagasaw was so dead set on playing tackle that he would never, ever dream of playing another position. If you talk to him, he's going to leave. There are some guys that are like that. I'm not going to play there. If you try to play me there, I'm going to leave. I don't know that anyone thinks that about Charles Jagasaw. I think also if you're Notre Dame, you could look at him and say, hey, listen, man, Joe Walt played tackle and went number 5 overall. Quentin Nelson played guard and went number 6 overall. If you're good enough, you're going to be a top 10 pick, whether you're a guard or tackle. And it's nothing to say that an NFL team can't draft you and still think you're a tackle. You'll have tackle tape. And just because you're a guard this year doesn't mean you may not be a tackle next year. There's way too many reasons why it would make sense to stay. And then also on top of that, Charles Jagasaw and his family are also people put a very high value on him getting a degree from the University of Notre Dame, which is a big reason he picked Notre Dame to begin with.
And nothing says that once you get to the NFL, you're going to stay at the position that you were drafted at. I mean, look at Mekhi Becton. Mekhi Becton was drafted to be a tackle for the Jets, was not great. And then he got picked up by the Eagles, and they made him a guard. And then he became one of the more dominant interior offensive linemen in the NFL this past season. And so it's just nothing is set in stone just because that's where you project. I mean, Zach Martin was Notre Dame's left tackle for 2 years, and then he got to the NFL and they made him a guard.
For 4.
Liam Eichenberg, yeah.
Zach Martin was Notre Dame's starting left tackle for 4 years. He started 10, 11, 12, and 13.
I forgot about,
And he started on a 2013 offensive line that allowed 8 pressures 8 sacks all year.
And then, you have guys like Liam Eichenberg who played left tackle his entire time. I mean, last year he was taking snaps at center.
Robert Hainsey's played right tackle his whole career at Notre Dame and has played guard and center in the NFL,
Mm-hmm.
If the NFL doesn't think you're a tackle, they're not going to play a tackle no matter what you do in college.
Yep.
And if they think you can play tackle, then you may still get that shot at tackle. So I remember, I'm trying to remember who it was. But there's like Rashawn Slater was a guy that a lot of people said, I think this guy's going to be a tackle in the NFL or a guard in the NFL. And he goes to the NFL and the Chargers love him a tackle. So, yeah. So that's kind of where it's at. So, Mark, that's a good question. Let me see if there's any others because we are kind of wrapping up here. And any recruiting questions about who they're going to land is better for the mailbag. And let's see here. I think that's going to be – I wanted to get this up from Josh Buffo, the motivational business banker. Josh said, I wanted to take a second and thank you guys for providing all of us Notre Dame junkies our daily fix. IB Nation is the best indie coverage and community by far. I'm just happy to be a small part of it. I really do appreciate that, Josh. I really do. And like I know I bust chops sometimes and some of my rants sometimes people take as personal attacks and all that kind of stuff. And they're not. But I am very appreciative of this community. Like sometimes, I'll talk about a take that somebody has, and Trevor will tell you this. And I'm like, man, it's just, but I talk about our community to people all the time about what makes this place different. It's not that all of our takes are the best or all of our predictions are the best, not just us, we're talking about you guys, but it's a genuine community. And the fact that we had someone who was having some issues with their child a couple of years ago, and he put some out there, and within a day, this community had raised over $1,000 for him. A guy this past year whose dog was sick and he didn't have a lot of money and he couldn't pay for the surgery. They were talking about having to put the dog down if he couldn't afford surgery. He asked me, hey, can I put this on the board? I said, yeah, man, go for it. And within a few hours, he had enough money that he was able to Now we always vet it. You know, I had him send me he took a screenshot from the vet of the bill and everything. And so I was able to vet that it was, but like within hours, he was paying his dog was in there getting surgery and he was paying for it and all that. Like, that's just a bunch of people who care about each other. I mean, Notre Dame football and all that are our unifying thing. And if you want to know why I don't we don't do politics, it's that right there is why. Because at the end of the day, I want this to be about things that unify us, not things that divide us. And we're all here because of Notre Dame football, but at the same time, we're all here because the ones that have been around for a long time, because there's a genuine care for each other and just for humanity. Like, hey, that's my brother, my Notre Dame brother. Never met the dude, but I'm sending him money to help him out with this thing, or I'm praying for him, or I'm encouraging him, or whatever. A dude we never met. And then you hear about people that end up meeting, like when we have our tailgates, so, oh, you're so-and-so, it's great to meet you, man. Like, I met IM Tenzin this year, and I met some other guys, and you're just like, hey, man, I met Peter Weber. Pete Weber was that one of the things. Like, that's not at all what I thought you'd look like. I literally had in my head kind of convinced that you might actually look like. So, met Salty a couple years ago. It's always great, but it's just the community aspect is really what I'm the most happy about that's come from this little venture that we started a few years ago. Is just that there's a place that if you're going through a tough time, our guy Trevor Rocket lost his wife this year. What did he do? Came here, shared that moment with us because he wanted to be with people that he knew cared about him. Probably never met any of these people in person. And that's the thing I love about this community that to me makes it the best. And that's y'all, honestly. That's on y'all. And we greatly appreciate that. So thank you for those kind words, Josh. And then also for us, thank you guys, because y'all make this community truly what it is. Otherwise, it'd just be two dudes talking Notre Dame football, which is fine. It's great. But what makes it a community is you. And it's very appreciated. We don't always have to agree. Here's the thing. We don't always have to agree to care about each other. There's nobody I disagree with publicly, verbally, than Andrew Gilmore. But he keeps coming back. Why? Is he a glutton for punishment? Maybe. But he also knows, like, it's never personal. Like, we have the same loves. We just look at things differently. But if he needed prayer, if he needs something, he knew that this community would be there right there for him. And that's what I love about this place. And it's an honor to be a part of it. And you guys make that happen. So with that being said, enough sappiness. Let's take us out of here, Trev. No IB Nation sports talk tonight, by the way. Just so we're clear.
Well, listen, folks, that'll do it for another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Brian and I will be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. For the Friday free-for-all mailbag. Like I said at the start of this mailbag, if you didn't get your question answered for whatever reason, throw it in tomorrow. But tomorrow, the entire show, Friday free-for-all mailbag, where you guys get to dictate what Brian and I get to talk about all day long. But before we get there, folks, please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family, anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. Whatever streaming platform you listen to this on, whether it be Spotify podcasts or Apple podcasts, we'd greatly appreciate a 5-star review. And of course, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. The community aspect of what we do here, everybody in the chat that we see in here on a daily basis, they're all a part of that awesome community. And if you want to join it, check us out at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Until tomorrow at 1 p.m., that's Brian. I'm Trevor. We'll see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.